The controversial issue of bilingual education in California got a little more interesting today. President Clinton officially denounced Proposition 227, which would abolish bilingual education after only 1 year. Michael Golden takes a look at the issue tonight through the eyes of local educators here in the Valley.
Steph, most Californians are for Prop 227, but it has its detractors, now including the President of the United States and the Department of Education. Currently, there are more than 1 million students in California public schools who have limited English skills. Under Proposition 227, these students would be required to move into English-only classrooms after 1 year.
Proposition 227 ignores the individual needs of each child. Some children can't learn to read in 1 year.
The administration is pushing for a goal of 3 years to phase out bilingual education. President Clinton adds that local school districts should make the decisions on the bilingual issue, and the local president of the Association of Mexican-American Educators agrees.
Definitely, we know that local communities can make the better decision for their students and for their community. And again, Proposition 227 takes that away from the communities, and it makes one model fits all. And we do believe that every community knows what's best for the community, knows what's best for the students, and so they should make those decisions.
A teacher at Valderas Elementary would also like to see local control and says that bilingual education should not be painted as an evil.
Our test scores here at Valderas for our children who take SABE, the equivalent of the Sat 9 in English, consistently shows that our students score at least above the 50th percentile. So that means that something is working and our kids are beginning to learn and grow.
But former Fresno State professor Tomas Martinez says that's not enough. And Martinez is in the majority of California voters on this issue.
If they don't learn English early in their school career, then the rest of their career and life, they'll be playing catch-up, and that doesn't cut the mustard.
Martinez says that 1 year is plenty of time for any child to become proficient in a second language. Percent of voters polled in California are in favor of Proposition 227, but opponents continue to warn voters to read the initiative carefully. They say the text can be confusing and misleading.
Good evening, I'm Yolanda Nava.
And I'm Hugh Hewitt.
Our top story tonight, the Clinton administration is diving into the most treacherous waters of California politics, Proposition 227 and the battle over bilingual education.
Speaking today through his press secretary, President Clinton said he opposes the June ballot initiative to ban bilingual education in public schools, even though polls show 2/3 of Californians support it.
Proposition 227 would replace current bilingual classes with English immersion instruction for 1 year. After that, students will be transferred to mainstream classes taught in English only. The president, however, says the initiative is too rigid to meet the varying needs of thousands of students who are still learning English. Instead, he supports a proposal by the U.S. Department of Education calling for 3 years of bilingual classes to bring non-English speaking students up to speed. Today, Press Secretary Mike McCurry told reporters in Washington, you cannot adopt in a state as large as California a one-size-fits-all policy.
In Sacramento today, Governor Pete Wilson was quick to respond. At a news conference, he said that California voters can do without advice from outsiders. As for the president, Wilson said he had a poor track record backing statewide initiatives.
The president has indicated that he will try to oppose and defeat 227. I think he may make it 0 for 3 in a reverse hat trick. He opposed 187, it passed. He opposed 209, it passed. I suspect that when he opposes 227, it will pass. But what I think is very clear is that it is the responsibility of the people of this state to make that decision, and I think they will make it very well without his help.
Does the president really think he can change public opinion from 3,000 miles away? Earlier this evening, I talked with his point person on the issue, Delia Pompa, director of the Office of Bilingual Education in the United States Department of Education. Director Pompa, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Today, Secretary of Education Riley announced the administration's opposition to California's Proposition 227 that will end bilingual education if it passes. Do you think that this will have any effect at all on the population of California when it goes to the voting booth?
Do I think the Secretary's statement will have an effect?
Yes.
I certainly hope it will. We are very concerned about the UN's initiative, Proposition 227. We feel that if it passes, it's going to cause great harm to California's 1.3 million limited English proficient children.
Do you expect that the Secretary and yourself will be out here to campaign against the proposition?
I'm not certain that I would use the term campaign. The Secretary will be there at some time. The President will be there at some time. I'm not certain about my own schedule yet.
How about President Clinton? Do you expect he'll actually come out and stomp around the state trying to stop this from passing?
Well, stomping around the state is a very different notion than visiting California. I know he's scheduled to visit California, and I'm sure that he will be asked many questions about the UN's initiative, and I know he'll have some responses for reporters when he's out there.
When the President comes out and talks about Prop 227, what will you advise him to say in terms of an alternative to it?
Well, he actually has his own very clear views about the UN's initiative, and he is concerned about the initiative, and we've talked internally in the White House and within the department about what our own views are as to what should be going on. We think that children who are limited English proficient should, first of all, have access to a good curriculum that's linked to high standards.
But I guess the point I'm trying to get at is what exactly is wrong with the initiative?
Well, there are several things wrong with it, but let me give you three very important things that are wrong with it. One is that there is no research that indicates that children can learn English and learn to learn in English in 1 year. Second, it takes away control, local control, from school districts and parents. There are many, many different ways to teach limited English proficient children.
Let me stop you right there, Director Pompey. You're right about that. It would make a statewide rule, but since local controls of an issue to you, why is the federal government telling the state of California what to do when you're concerned, quote, about local control, close quote?
We are certainly not telling the state of California what to do. We are quite concerned about what the impact would be on these children. There are federal civil rights requirements that limited English proficient children be served and be provided a comprehensible education. So to that extent, we have quite an interest in how limited English proficient children are educated.
If Proposition 227 passes, is that a violation of federal civil rights law? Is that what you're saying?
It's not a violation on its face. We do have concerns that on the first day of implementation, it is likely that there will be several violations of the civil rights laws.
Can you expand on that for me? What kind of violations? Because it's ahead 70-30. Most people expect it will pass. What kind of violations are you talking about?
Well, first of all, under our three-part test in looking at the civil rights of limited English proficient children, a district can implement any kind of program it wants for these children as long as the program is based on sound research, as long as the program is well-resourced and well-implemented, and as long as the program has a good evaluation.
So let me understand, though, Director Pompa, does that mean the Department of Justice, you expect, will be prosecuting school districts that attempt to implement the UN's initiative if it passes?
Well, that takes us several steps beyond where we would be. The way our civil rights laws work is on the first day of implementation, if parents and communities feel that their district is in violation for an individual child or a group of children, they would file a complaint. We would follow up on those complaints and investigate whether in fact there is a violation, and then we would proceed from there before the Department of Justice were to be involved.
But you're saying that it is possible that the UN's initiative could end up in the courts, brought there by the federal government, and attempt to enjoin it as a violation of federal civil rights law?
We do think it's very possible.
Has that been discussed with the President?
Yes, it has.
And he agrees with that analysis?
Well, he has given us the go-ahead on this announcement, and he is behind our announcement, so I do think he agrees with it.
And does he in these discussions countenance the idea of using federal law enforcement to overturn the will of the California electorate if it goes that way?
We have not had discussions at that level, and I have not been in personal conversations with the President.
My last question for you, I want to give you a good long period of time to answer this, perhaps minutes to do this, is that I saw Mike McCurry, the President's press spokesperson today, say that the administration has its own fix-it ticket ready to give to California bilingual education. What do you think is wrong with it, and what ought to be done?
Well, first of all, they have a tremendous shortage of teachers in California, a shortage of teachers who are trained in either English as a second language or bilingual education, who are prepared to work with these children. One of the things we are proposing to do is increase our budget for fiscal year 1999, doubling the budget of $25 million to $50 million to help states train teachers. A second thing is we want to ensure that districts that receive federal money are being held accountable for children learning English and children learning academic subject matter. So we will be monitoring we already do monitor districts who receive our money. We will continue that monitoring in a very stringent way. And then finally, we have a leadership position that we can play here in providing technical assistance and helping districts and ensuring that the curriculum they're providing these children is tied to high standards, whatever those standards are in that state.
Director Pompa, thank you so much for joining us, staying up late tonight to answer these questions.
Certainly.
Good night.
Good night.
Joining us with the reactions are Gloria Tuchman, one of the co-sponsors of Proposition 227, and Maribel Medina, staff attorney for MALDEF, the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, an opponent of Proposition 227. Ms. Tuchman, what is your reaction to the President's comments and his opposition to 227?
I think Bill Clinton better look at taking care of business at home instead of looking at California and our initiative process. The voters of this state will take care of business. They will vote this in. This will be legal. It will pass overwhelmingly. This is what the people will say.
Ms. Medina, 70%, according to a poll recently taken, 70% of the voters support the initiative. Do you think that the President coming out in opposition will help bring voters over to your side?
Absolutely. I think it's very commendable that our President, including the residents of California, has taken a very leadership role on this issue. What's important now is for voters to understand what's in the initiative. The 70% of the voters that you indicated the poll showed supported the initiative have not fully understood how damaging and how extreme this initiative is. President Clinton's announcement today shows that he is aware that Proposition 227 is an extreme measure that will not teach children English and will be harmful to California schools in general.
Ms. Tuchman, although the President has a lousy record in getting initiatives passed or stopped in California, he's lost a couple of these. Nevertheless, it is the bully pulpit. He does have a lot of it. Or doesn't this intimidate you to a certain extent that he might be able to turn people around on Proposition 227?
Oh, heavens no. In fact, in the paper today, it even said that they can't even defend the status quo. Bilingual education has been a failure, and they want to take care of business perhaps next year with legislation through Congress. The children of this state can no longer wait for anyone to take care of them. That's why we had to go to an initiative process.
Ms. Medina, there is some truth to that. The administration did lambaste bilingual education in making its announcement today, saying that it had failed and needed overhauling. They just didn't like this initiative, sort of the old mend it, don't end it sort of thing. Isn't that kind of hard to call an endorsement of the present system?
What the President did today was come out against Proposition 227. And the reason you're able to divide the two things, one, whether you're in favor or opposed to bilingual education, is irrelevant June 2nd. Because Proposition 227 is not a referendum on bilingual education. It is an initiative that will dismantle all educational programs that teach children English, regardless of how effective they are. So there's no contradiction there.
But one of the things that has happened, I mean, the bilingual education legislation was sunsetted more than a decade ago, and little has happened in the last 10 years or more to deal with either the pros or cons of bilingual education. All of a sudden we have the UNS initiative on the ballot, and suddenly the State Assembly has an alternative measure. The State Department of Education wants to give more local control on bilingual education issues to local school districts, and now the President comes out opposing the initiative. Where has everybody been for the last 10 years talking about the pros and cons of education?
I won't even say 10 years. We have had bilingual education in this country for 30
well,
years.
Yes, but it's sunset.
It's sunset. 13 years ago, it's sunset. As the sun goes down, it still keeps coming back again. And finally, the State Board of Education, which I really admire them for coming out to finally say, we have no really legal control to tell districts what they must do. But districts such as Los Angeles, districts such as Santa Ana, districts such as San Francisco, San Diego, the status quo will remain the same. We need this initiative, and that it is absolutely imperative that this initiative pass so that children will get English. That is why it is so named English for the Children.
In the interview with Director Pompa from the U.S. Department of Education, there was some discussion that there could be lawsuits if the initiative passes and children would be prevented, denied equal access of opportunity in education. Couldn't we take the flip side of that, though, that right now, because children, Latino children and other non-English speaking children are not transitioning quickly enough into English, that they are currently being denied equal access to educational opportunities?
Children now are being taught English, and there is assurance that the children are having access to academic instruction as well. This whole myth that children are not being transitioned quickly into English only is exactly that, a myth. Children receive access to academic instruction while they're also being taught English. And just to comment on a previous point that was
Can I have an
made.
interview? We've got just a little bit of time. I want to give Ms. Tuchman a final comment here. Does the President's announcement seem to you political, or does it seem academic? That is he basing it on political considerations or on research,
It
in
is
your opinion?
strictly politics. Bilingual education has always been a political issue. There is money at stake here, and the children's literacy is at stake. And I will say the civil rights of the children are being violated, and that is why this initiative must go through. They are not receiving English.
Final comment, Ms. Medina?
Just in terms of the money issue, I think that's very interesting, and it shows how frightening this initiative is. This initiative calls for a $500 million price tag over a 10-year period from the General Education Fund. There is no defense of that. There is no relationship between taking $500 million away from the educational fund and teaching children English.
Okay, thank you very much, Gloria Tuchman and Maribel Medina, for joining us. We'll be back with more news after this.
When George Louis visited his son Travell's kindergarten class at Lincoln School in Oakland, California, he was shocked. Travell and a couple of other English-speaking students had no idea what was going on. The teacher was speaking Chinese.
And the teacher not paying any attention to them while they instructed the class for approximately 45 minutes in Cantonese.
I can't write Chinese and I can't speak Chinese.
Bilingual classes are a large part of the curriculum here. 70% of the students speak Chinese. Louis claims he didn't know his son was in a class where the teacher taught in Chinese nearly half the time. Now an anti-bilingual group is sponsoring Louis in a lawsuit against the Oakland School District. English-only classes are offered for grades 1 through 6, but not kindergarten.
They surveyed the parents, and there were 10 English-only parents. 5 asked to be in English only, but then they ran into the problem between AM and PM, and you can't have a class with 5 kids in it.
Louis was dissatisfied with other options the school offered, which still involved classes where Chinese was spoken much of the time. They also offered to transfer the boy to another school. But Louis is disabled and doesn't have a car. He walks his son to school every day. A school farther away would be out of the question. And besides, he says, language should not be an issue.
My kid needs a strong education in English first, and that he should not be taught a foreign language first. I think that the English deserves the #1 priority.
It's also a priority for immigrant parents like Hai Song, who say Chinese language instruction helped her daughter.
When she got here, we didn't know that much English, and when she got to school, the teacher spoke both the Chinese and the English, and helped her a lot to understand the English.
The case comes at a time when bilingual education is under fire. In June, California voters will be asked to decide whether to make English the only official language of the classroom.
Rusty Dornan, CNN, Oakland, California.
$187, 209, 227. No son simples números, son medidas que limitan la educación de nuestros hijos, ponen en peligro la salud de nuestra familia y nos quitan el derecho al trabajo. Hemos expresado nuestro descontento, pero no basta. Ha llegado la hora de usar un arma más poderosa, el poder del voto. Descúbralo este sábado 28 a las 11 de la mañana por su canal 34. $187, 209, 227. Son leyes contra la educación, la salud y el trabajo de los hispanos. No basta protestar. Hay que usar un arma más poderosa. El poder del voto. Descúbralo el sábado 28 por su canal 34. sueño de miles de familias hispanas se está destruyendo. Leyes que afectan la educación de nuestros hijos. Medidas que ponen en peligro la salud de los nuestros hasta antes de nacer. Regulaciones que nos quitan el derecho al trabajo digno. Y es solo el comienzo. Pero hay una poderosa arma para defendernos. El poder del voto. Descúbralo este sábado 28 a las 11 de la mañana por su canal 34. El sueño de la familia hispana está siendo destruido con leyes en contra de su educación, salud y el trabajo. Es apenas el comienzo. Solo un arma puede defendernos. El poder del voto. Descúbralo este sábado 28 a las 11 de la mañana por su canal 34.
Today, many immigrants work long hours, yet barely earn enough to feed their children. Unless schools teach children to read and write English, they may be trapped in the same hard life. These children have a brighter future. Their parents force schools to teach more English so their children could succeed in this country. Proposition 227 establishes a program to intensively teach children to read and write English as soon as they begin school. Vote yes on Proposition 227. Muchos inmigrantes trabajan largas horas, pero ganan apenas suficiente para alimentar a sus niños. A menos que las escuelas enseñen en inglés, podrán ser atrapados en la misma vida dura. Estos niños tendrán un futuro prometedor, porque sus padres forzaron a las escuelas a enseñarles más inglés. La Proposición 227 establece un programa para enseñarles intensivamente a los niños leer y escribir en inglés en cuando entren a la escuela. Vote sí en la Proposición 227.
Los niños necesitan una educación buena para obtener un buen empleo. Debemos enseñarles el inglés. Este hombre apoya la Proposición 227 para dar una oportunidad a sus niños. Este hombre es mi padre, Richard Reardon, el alcalde de Los Ángeles. Él cree que sus niños merecen más. Yo estoy de acuerdo con él. Junta con nosotros en votando sí para la Proposición 227.
Yes for the children.
Los niños necesitan una educación buena para obtener un buen empleo. Debemos enseñarles el inglés. Este hombre apoya la Proposición 227 para dar una oportunidad a sus niños. Este hombre es mi padre, Richard Reardon, el alcalde de Los Ángeles. Él cree que sus niños merecen más. Yo estoy de acuerdo con él. Junta con nosotros en votando sí para la Proposición 227.
Yes for the children.
TV.
¿Sabía usted que si la proposición 227 fuera a aprobarse, un maestro podría ser demandado en la corte simplemente por hablarle español a sus niños? La educación bilingüe es uno de los temas más discutidos y más importantes para el futuro de nuestros hijos. Y muchos en nuestra comunidad están de acuerdo que los métodos de enseñar inglés en nuestras escuelas podrían mejorarse. Afortunadamente ya se hizo. La Asamblea de California acaba de aprobar una ley que entrega control del programa de educación bilingüe a las escuelas locales, haciendo posible realizar todos los cambios necesarios. Esta nueva ley elimina completamente la necesidad de la proposición 227, pero no podemos permitirnos bajar la guardia. Esta victoria no significa que ya hayamos ganado esa batalla. Todavía hay que derrotar a la 227 en las elecciones de junio por el bien de nuestros niños. Tenemos que votar no a la proposición 227.
Cubriendo 11 condados del área de la Bahía, usted está viendo Univisión 14, San Francisco, Oakland, San José, Santa Rosa.
Candidates for governor disagree on just about every issue, but they all agree Proposition 227 won't teach kids English. Jane Harmon.
I will vote no on Proposition 227.
Al Checky. Ray Davis.
I'm voting no.
Dan Lundgren.
Oh, what I mean by opposition.
Proposition 227 wastes $50 million, and kids won't learn English. No on 227.
International. This is World News.
In the United States, nearly 1.5 million students in California public schools have limited English skills. So some classes are taught in both English and Spanish. But there has been much debate on whether bilingual education is a help or a hindrance for students. In a few days, residents will vote on the controversial topic. CNN's Jennifer Arthur explains.
Education is the hot-button issue in California, and one ballot initiative in the June 2nd primary is being closely watched throughout the United States. If opinion polls are accurate, voters will overwhelmingly pass Proposition 227 to virtually dismantle bilingual education in California. Conservatives are strongly backing the idea, and opponents banked on united opposition from California's large Spanish-speaking population. That hasn't happened, at least not yet. Polls show rank-and-file Hispanic voters actually support getting rid of bilingual education by 2 to 1.
They should just go with the English-speaking language. ¿Por el inglés o no por el inglés?
Yeah, I do. So you want both language or just one?
Both.
In bilingual education, students are allowed to study some subjects in their native tongue while learning English. Under Proposition 227, they would be immersed in classes to learn English for up to 1 year, after which all instruction would be conducted solely in English. Educators defend the current system.
If I had to think of having youngsters come into school and not be able to use their own language, I don't know how they would ever acquire the academic skills necessary.
Millionaire GOP businessman Ron Unz is bankrolling the initiative.
The children leave the public schools not being able to read English or write English or even speak English properly, and that's a disaster.
A lion's share of funding to oppose Proposition 227 comes from the head of Univision Communications, one of the most prominent Spanish-language media companies in the country. Univision chief Gerald Perenchio has ponied up $1.5 million from his own pocket, almost twice what Unz has spent. The money's gone to mount an air war that will peak in the days ahead.
Proposition 227 establishes a program to intensively teach children to read and write English as soon as they begin school.
President Clinton says no on 227.
The proposition is backed by Republicans like Governor Pete Wilson and Los Angeles Mayor Richard Riordan. It's Wilson's backing that's become controversial. Wilson backed measures like Proposition 187 to do away with most public services for illegal immigrants, and Prop 209, which eliminated affirmative action in government programs. Both have hurt Republicans with the state's growing Hispanic vote. Unz wanted Wilson to stay out of the bilingual fight.
What I was concerned about was Pete Wilson becoming in any way publicly identified with our initiative.
Political analysts will be watching closely how the Hispanic community votes. It will affect the fate of bilingual education and may say a lot about the future politics of the country's fastest-growing electorate. Jennifer Arthur, CNN, Los Angeles.
And that's our report for now. Insight is next. I'm Denise Dillon. Thanks for watching.
Now we'll look at the bilingual education debate in California, where it's an issue in next week's statewide election. Spencer Michaels reports.
If Proposition 227 on California's June 2nd ballot passes, instruction in 2 languages like this probably will end.
Because dogs like to fight.
The proposition seeks to severely curtail bilingual education in public schools. About 1/3 of all non-English speaking children, just under 500,000, are enrolled in bilingual classes of one sort or another. The proposition put on the ballot by initiative is the brainchild of Ron Unz, successful Silicon Valley software entrepreneur and one-time Republican candidate for governor, now a crusader to end bilingual education. He says his goal is simple.
Teaching English to children as soon as possible once they enter school. It's taking young children who don't know the language, putting them in a classroom with the other children who are learning the language, and having them intensively taught English for a period of a few months up to a year until they've learned enough English to be mainstream.
What Unz wants to eliminate is the use of Spanish or other foreign languages in non-language classes like math or science. Bilingual schools use that technique to try to keep students from falling behind in academic subjects.
And here's a snake, and what's that, a source?
Yeah.
What's this?
Those students are eased into speaking English in other classes with more and more English as they get older.
The current system of bilingual education in California is an utter, unmitigated disaster. Right now, after 30 years of trying to make the system work, 1/4 of all the children in California public schools don't know English. And of the ones who don't know English, each year in California, only about 5 or 6% learn English.
Opponents of 227 say those statistics are faulty and that there is no evidence children in bilingual education learn English less well or less quickly than those in English-only classes. Unz's initiative would allow parents to sue teachers and administrators if their children aren't taught entirely in English. The measure also calls for 1 year of intensive English classes, in most cases, for non-English speakers. It allows school boards to continue bilingual ed, but only if enough parents request a waiver. Prop 227 comes at a time when California's population is becoming more Hispanic, more Asian, and less white. Currently, 29% of Californians are Hispanic and 11% Asian. In 2 years, whites will be a minority. Fears about excessive immigration led to the passage of Proposition 187 in 1996 that cut back on services for immigrants. The courts held it unconstitutional. Those same fears have bolstered support for 227, according to Rosita Apodaca, in charge of San Francisco's bilingual program.
Certainly when demographics in a state are changing as dramatically as they are, we know that that instills an awful lot of fear and angst in people, and certainly they react in very dramatic fashion.
In California public schools, 1.4 million students, or 1/4 of the total, have limited English proficiency, a nearly 300% increase since 1980. Nearly 80% speak Spanish, one of 82 languages spoken.
En ocasiones se cubrían el cuerpo con trapos hechos a base de juncos.
Bilingual services, like those offered at San Jose's River Glen School, use 1.2% of California's entire K-12 education budget. Opponents of Prop 227 point to River Glen, an elementary school, as an example of bilingual education that works. Its 470 students, 70% of them Hispanic, are expected to be completely bilingual by graduation. The principal, Cecilia Berry, is a native of Cuba.
Basically, bilingual education means that you instruct in the primary language until the child learns enough English to continue instruction in English. If you have quality instruction, a quality English as a second language program, it will work.
What has been the result?
The results are that our graduates, when they leave our school in 6th and 7th grade, they speak 2 languages, they read and write 2 languages, they continue doing well academically in English only.
Mary Dorrego, who teaches 6th grade and is also a parent, thinks something is lost when kids are forced into English-only classes.
What happens is they lose their own culture, they lose their own identity, and the kids, young children, are going to learn English. You look, my own son's first language is Spanish, and you look around here, everything is English. His baseball teams are English, his Power Rangers are English, his friends on the block are English speakers, and the struggle is not learning the English. The struggle is maintaining the Spanish, because the children grow up in English all around them, and they're going to get the English.
Parents themselves of these children want their children to be taught English as quickly as possible. I mean, most parents feel that the culture of their family background is more the responsibility of the family, and that the school's responsibility is teaching children, giving children the educational tools they need to succeed in our society.
All these people here, that's my son, he's bilingual. That's Eloy, he's bilingual. That's Fernando, he's bilingual. That's David, he's bilingual.
Fernando Vega, a 75-year-old grandfather, retired aircraft mechanic, and former school board member, is one of the initiative's sponsors. He thinks bilingual education is completely wrong.
We have the highest dropout rate of any ethnic group. Our kids are not learning. So it has been a failure.
Vega says Hispanics are skeptical of bilingual ed. As a community leader, he says Hispanic neighbors come to him complaining about the programs.
I say, well, what's your problem? I have two children. I clean houses for a living, but I want my children to learn English, and I'll pay you whatever it takes. I said, Senora, how about the schools? No, Senor, the schools don't teach them English, only Spanish. I can do that at home and do a better job.
Monday, Tuesday.
All sides acknowledge problems with bilingual education. The programs are vastly uneven from school to school. It takes many kids too long to learn English. There's a shortage of trained teachers and textbooks, and there is no accountability, no requirement to be sure the programs work. Those shortcomings hit home with many Hispanic voters, who polls show are evenly split on the proposition. Unz and his side are using Hispanic voices to attract more support, much to the chagrin of bilingual advocates. Pro 227 commercials are in Spanish and English.
Unless schools teach children to read and write English, they may be trapped in the same hard life. Vote sí en la proposición 227.
Opponents of the proposition include school boards and teachers' organizations. Their commercials argue that the alternative to bilingual will cost more than the current classes.
Proposition 227 appropriates $50 million a year for a new spending program.
And it won't go to our schools.
The PTA says no on 227.
Principal Cecilia Berry says while there may be problems with bilingual at some schools, Prop 227 is not the answer.
If we need to fix bilingual education, let's fix it, but let's not eliminate it.
The California legislature recently passed a measure to reform bilingual education after years of argument. The governor vetoed it and then endorsed Prop 227. Detractors say legislative reforms are too little, too late. At Lincoln High School in San Francisco, where 22% of the 2,400 students are enrolled in bilingual classes, bilingual coordinator Fan Fang says Prop 227 is far too extreme. He says it will be a disaster for non-English speaking kids, especially for older children who have come to America not speaking English.
They will be placed into a so-called English language classroom, and regardless of their age, based on the proficiency. And then after a year, and they have to go to regular classrooms. That creates a big problem to the regular teachers.
How do you know?
because, because it's impossible for anybody to learn a language for 1 year and then master all the academics.
Fang's Cantonese literature class is all in Chinese, so these freshmen can feel confident while they learn.
Okay, now we read a lot of poetry here.
But in other classes, for these same students, especially English grammar and literature, English is used.
You don't possess by having him making yourself known as.
In this bilingual science class, half the students speak Chinese as their first language. The instruction is in Chinese, but the worksheets are in English. The English speakers in the class are learning Chinese. In other words, both groups of students are becoming proficient in 2 languages while learning science.
We think that by changing the language, that will be the silver bullet for the kids.
At Stanford School of Education, academics say the Prop 227 debate focuses on learning English when the real problem is low overall achievement that ties into poverty. Professor Kenji Hakuda teaches future bilingual teachers.
So in California, 80% of kids who are limited English proficient are Spanish speakers. They come from families where the parents may have less of a history of formal education, high rates of poverty, schools that are poorly equipped, not inadequate, inadequately trained teachers, those kinds of conditions, and that sort of is true regardless of whether you're in a bilingual or an English-only program.
A lot of people in our audience have submitted questions.
2/3 of voters polled now say they are in favor of Proposition 227. But all 4 major candidates for governor, both Democrats and Republican, plus President Clinton, have come out against Prop 227. Meanwhile, English-only advocates around the country will be watching California's election with an eye to eliminating bilingual education in the 48 other states where it currently exists.
¿Puede comprender lo que digo? ¿La educación bilingüe promueve la diversidad étnica o es un despilfarro de dinero?
The children leave the public schools not being able to read English or write English or even speak English properly, and that's a disaster.
If I had to think of having youngsters come into school and not be able to use their own language, I don't know how they would ever acquire the academic skills necessary.
In any language, Proposition 227 would spell the end of bilingual education in California public schools. Like Proposition 187, which sought to cut public services for most illegal immigrants, and Proposition 209, which dismantled affirmative action programs in public employment and university admissions, California's latest ballot initiative is sparking a national debate. The head of Univisión, a leading Spanish language media company, is funding a TV campaign against 227.
Proposition 227 establishes a program to intensively teach children to read and write English as soon as they begin school.
President Clinton says no on 227.
Well, a Field Institute poll shows most California voters, 61%, favor eliminating bilingual education. However, that is fewer than the 71% that favored the bill last month. I know you'll forgive my rusty Spanish at the top of the segment there, but here to talk about this issue today are Ron Unz, chairman of English for the Children. He wrote Proposition 227. Also, Carlos Garcia, superintendent of the Fresno Unified School District. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Ron,
Thank you.
as we said, your name is on this initiative. Why do you think it's necessary?
Bilingual education was a well-intentioned program that began 20, 30 years ago, but it's been a complete and dismal failure. It doesn't work. A quarter of the children in California public schools today don't know English, and each year only 5 or 6% learn English. 95% of the children who start a given school year not knowing English have not learned it by the end of that school year, and that's failure in any language.
So how does it work?
Well, it doesn't work.
No. I mean, how does 227 work? In other words, if you have kids coming into the school system who are limited in their English knowledge, how do they matriculate into the system? How do you do it?
It's a very simple idea. Our initiative would take those children who don't know English and put them in a short-term, intensive English language immersion program to teach them English as quickly as possible. Once they've learned enough English to be able to do regular schoolwork in English, they would be moved into the regular classes with all the other children. And for young children, 5 or 6 years old, it should only take them a few months or at most a year to learn enough English to be mainstreamed.
Now, if they don't learn as quickly as you think they're going to learn, is somebody going to stay with them?
Absolutely. If they don't learn English after 1 year, they can be kept in that program for a longer period of time. But most of these children, these young 5- and 6-year-old children, can learn English very, very quickly and easily.
Okay, what happens if you enter the school, the public school, in, say, the 10th grade?
Yeah. What our initiatives, what I personally believe is that when you're talking about older children, children who are 12 or 13 or 14, you can make a very reasonable case in favor of bilingual education, teaching children that age in their native language while they're learning English so they don't fall behind academically. Now, most immigrants I know don't agree with that. They think children even of that age should be taught English as quickly as possible, but at least it does make a plausible case. Our initiative makes it possible for parents of children of any age who want to place or keep their children in bilingual instruction to get a waiver to do so. But it's much easier for the parents of older children. If the child is 10 years or older, the parent simply has to go down to the school and meet with the principal and teachers and decide together whether the child would do better in a bilingual program or an English immersion program.
Carlos Garcia, you admit that the current bilingual system doesn't work, but you don't think this is the answer, do you?
Well, I admit that a portion of it doesn't work. I mean, Mr. Unz generalizes quite eloquently. The fact of the matter is that only 30% of all the children in California who are limited English proficient students are in bilingual programs. So what's the excuse for all the other kids who aren't in bilingual programs? Why aren't they far exceeding everybody else? I mean, the reality is that you can't paint everything with one brush. This one-size-fits-all approach is absurd. People learn language at different rates. There are some students that could master it in 1 year, but it's ridiculous to assume that most students will, especially what I'm talking about is academic language. You could learn oral language out in the playground, but to learn academic language so you could succeed in school, that'd be like asking Mr. Unz to go spend a year in China and by the end of that year be able to read all Chinese, be able to take tests in Chinese, and that just doesn't happen in the real world.
Let me gauge our audience here. Catherine, your thoughts?
Well, I see that the bilingual programs that we have as they exist today aren't working as well as they could. But I don't think that an English immersion program is the answer. I don't think that children who are coming from other countries are ready to be completely immersed in the English language. They're dealing with major culture shock, among many other factors. And I think the money and effort spent on creating an English immersion program could be spent creating a gradual change over from Spanish or whatever their native language is to English, and that would be much more effective.
Yes, go ahead.
Can I respond to that? There's a misconception that most of the children who don't know English in schools come from other countries. That's not the case. Over half of the children we're talking about are native-born Americans. In the Santa Barbara School District, 80% of the children in bilingual programs were born right in Santa Barbara. These are children who are born here. In many cases, they already speak some English when they start school, but they're placed in bilingual programs. And in California, bilingual education is a synonym for Spanish-only instruction. The children receive 30 minutes or an hour of English a day and everything else is in Spanish. And that's one reason so few of them learn English. And by the way, Mr. Garcia had the figures wrong. Over half of all the children in public schools who don't know English are in native language programs. And for Latinos, it's closer to 60% are in native language programs where they're given a lot of Spanish or almost all Spanish during the day. And that's why they don't do well in school.
Well, I think that one of the things that we greatly differ on is that, you know, Mr. Unz assumes that bilingual programs are not to teaching English to students, and he's absolutely wrong. The #1 priority, certainly in Fresno Unified School District, is that we know that every single child, the #1 priority, has to master the English language. What we're trying to do is get them to master the language as quickly as possible. What Mr. Unz fails to recognize is that there are a lot of students, and he's right about his statistics in terms of which students are here, but the reality is that most of the parents of these students happen to be illiterate themselves in their primary language. So this is a more complex issue than what he's talking about, because we need to get, even though he tries to address it in his proposition for adult training, we're doing that as it goes along in part of our programs, and at the same time, you know, the options do exist for students, contrary to the popular rumor that you know, we force kids into these programs. In Fresno, students can opt out of being in a bilingual program.
I got to jump in here because we do have to go to a break, and I want to talk about this when we get back. Why can't children be immersed in 2 languages at the same time? It's working in Miami, so we'll talk about that when we come back. Los Angeles County's population of 9.5 million is now 41% Hispanic. The Hispanic and Asian populations in that county have more than doubled in the past 20 years. Nationwide, about 200 schools in 20 states use 2-way bilingual programs. Welcome back. Before we have to cut away again for another break, I do want to talk to Marcela and our audience here because you were bringing out some points that the gentleman who had the internet message just a few minutes ago on the screen. It boils down to necessity versus luxury, as you were saying.
Yes, I was telling that actually the level of debate is quite, it's situated at 2 different levels. The one is talking about whether it's easier or not to learn a language at a certain age, and the other one is talking about the necessity of learning the language. And I sincerely believe that necessity overruns all kinds of luxury of whether it's early or late or not.
Yeah, Ron, is that the, I mean, what is in this for you? I mean, you're a millionaire businessman behind this bill. You're not an educator. I'm just curious as to what is in this initiative for you and why you think it's...
It's very simple. I've been interested in the issue of bilingual education for many, many years. I come from a little bit of an immigrant background myself. My mother was born in Los Angeles, but grew up not speaking a word of English. She learned English very quickly and easily when she was a young child and did very well in it. I've always been very skeptical of why children are kept for years in programs where they're not taught English in the public schools instead of being taught English quickly. Then in 1996, I read a series of articles in the Los Angeles Times describing how a group of immigrant Latino parents in downtown Los Angeles had to start a public boycott of their local elementary school because the school was refusing to teach their children English. And that seems strange to me. In other words, I'd always thought of bilingual education as being a failure. But there's a big difference between a program that's simply a failure and a program that's gone off the deep end to the point where parents have to carry picket signs because schools refuse to allow their children to learn English. Then I started checking the statistics in California more in detail and found out how bad they were. Again, 95% of the children every year in California are failing to learn English. And any program that has a 95% failure rate is not a program that we should keep up year after year after year. Latino immigrants want their children to learn English. They desperately want their children to learn English. And that's why all the statewide polls that have been conducted, 10 of them in the last year, show that we have very strong support, in some cases overwhelming support, among California's Asian and Latino immigrant population.
Okay, let me come back to that in just a minute, Ron. Miriam is you're a substitute teacher in Santa Barbara. Miriam at Bilingual Classes.
I was a bilingual substitute teacher for about a year. I'm from Santa Barbara, and I can verify what the gentleman from San Francisco is saying, that most of the students are born in Santa Barbara. They're native to Santa Barbara. I taught all the classes in Spanish, math, history, everything was in Spanish. All the textbooks were in Spanish. Everything in the walls was on Spanish. And I taught them English probably 20 minutes a day at most. And I really think that it's up to the parents to teach the kids English. Because you go to the store and many of the parents, the kids couldn't buy anything. And I think that they should learn English if they're in America. That's the language should be their their primary language.
I need to get a response from Carlos Garcia out of that, and unfortunately we do have to go to a commercial. Carlos, so hang with us and we'll pick up with you when we come back in just a second.
Join our TalkBack Live discussion. Phone us at 800-310-4266. Fax us at 888-310-4FAX. Or go online at cnn.com/talkback.
And welcome back to Talkback Live. We're talking about the value of bilingual education and whether English should be the language of the classroom. Before I invite a couple of other guests to join us, Miriam was just telling us a few moments ago, she's a substitute teacher in the Santa Barbara school system in bilingual classes, and then most of the kids that she had were born in Santa Barbara, yet by the 6th grade they didn't know any English. Mr. Garcia, I wanted you to answer that. I mean, how does this happen? I mean, that's clearly a system not working.
Well, in a lot of the cases is that we have very high migrant transit populations that move from one place to another. So they start in a program, then they move and they go somewhere else. So, you know, that is one of the issues that we have to deal with, because the students don't stay in the same school all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade. We have very few students that fall under that category that actually stay in the same school system. But I would like to refer to one of the issues that Mr. Unz brought up, and that is that, you know, this is being touted as being one of the new things to go back to programs like this. It's not, there's nothing new about this proposal. You know, people forget that prior to the mid-70s, we had immersion, full immersion education. We put students, all the Hispanic, Chicano students in Los Angeles were just put in submersion programs where they either sunk or they made it. And the reality is, you know, if you look at statistically the dropout rates then, the dropout rates were a lot higher than they are today. So, you know, I grew up here in Los Angeles. I went through that system. My primary language was Spanish. I had to learn that. I don't want to go back to the era where when we were playing in the playground, they'd stop us if we were speaking Spanish. They'd make us put our hands out and they'd paddle our hands for speaking Spanish.
Hopefully that would not happen. Let's bring in our other couple of guests right now. Joining the conversation, Jaime Zapata, Associate Director of Public Relations at the National Association for Bilingual Education, and Alice Callahan, Director of Las Familias del Pueblo, a community center for garment workers and their families. She led a boycott against a school that refused to teach immigrant children English. And welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
A few moments ago, I talked about how there is a bilingual program in Miami that seems to be working quite well, and I want to quote something from the Los Angeles Times that compares the two systems, and they say, in California, bilingual education is usually seen as a program just for students with limited English skills. But in Miami, bilingual education is sold as a program for everyone. In other words, immersing the children in two languages. Not that they're, you know, saying that they're just deficient in one, and therefore they have to learn one over the other. Your thoughts on that? To both of our new guests. Alice?
Yes. Dual immersion classes happen generally in upper middle class neighborhoods, and they're pretty much driven by English-speaking parents who want their children to learn another language. They're very expensive. They're very successful, but they're very expensive.
Miami, though. That's not the case in Miami, though.
At the Coral Way School, or are you talking about in general?
Well, I'm just talking in general, right. in Miami, where the population is so heavily Hispanic that they feel it is as necessary to their population that they know Spanish as English. In other words, they're both economically valid and necessary.
Right.
Bobby, let me interject just 1 second. This two-way programs are not for just for middle-class Americans. I was in a two-way program in the South Bronx of New York in an extremely poor neighborhood with everything stacked against the children in that school district. And I think my English is fairly good. My Spanish, I think, is just as good. And those are the kinds of opportunities that a good bilingual education program can give you. Mr. Unz can have his opinions, but that's all they are. I could tell you that I think that he's thinking of running for political office, and that's why he's talking about 227, and that's why he's bashing bilingual education. But you know what? What they don't have a right to do, because those opinions are incorrect, is impose them on people, and that's what Proposition 227 does, is it establishes a one-size-fits-all mandate for all children in the state of California, and it doesn't give parents a choice, period. They can talk about so-called exemptions in the program, that are absolutely impossible to meet when you look at the requirements. The fact is, this is one size fits all. It takes the choice away from parents, and it doesn't let them have a say whatsoever in how their children are educated.
If I can respond to that.
Let me have Alice have her say here. Go ahead.
Let me say, and I think this is really important for people to understand, nobody is opposed to people being bilingual. Only a fool would be opposed to people being bilingual. Proposition 227 has nothing to do with people being bilingual. What Proposition 227 addresses is the reality in California, which is Spanish language children are placed when they start school in kindergarten and in first grade in Spanish-only classes. I work with impoverished garment workers. They spend all day sewing sleeves and collars on blouses. It's not a future they want for their children. They know that unless their children learn to read and write, not simply speak, but read and write English well, they have no future in this country. They
You
may
know
be
what? My
poor,
mother
but
is
they're
a
not
garment
stupid.
worker, Alice. She's a poor garment worker. She works very hard as well, and she knew that I needed to not only learn English, but learn math, science, and all the other subjects that are part of an education. And she understood that if those subjects were taught to me in a language that I did not understand, I wasn't going to learn.
We got to go to break, but as we go to the commercial, Alan, a quick experience that you had.
Right. I grew up in New York City, and I went to the bilingual education there, and I think it's been a great success for myself. I've learned English just as good, and my Chinese has stayed with me also, and I think it's a great program.
Okay, we'll be back in just a minute. Continue this discussion. By 2010, the Hispanic origin population may become the second largest race group. By 2050, 1 in every 3 births will be Hispanic. And welcome back to Talk Back Live. We just got this fax a moment ago. Mindy in Texas says the USA became a great nation because the immigrants who came to this country learned English. No longer do the Latins feel compelled. I hope that's not true.
May I?
Yeah. Let me first get a comment here from a gentleman who's with the Mexican consulate here in Atlanta.
Yes, well, I speak more of my own experience here in Atlanta. I have 2 years here. My wife is French. They are learning French, English, and Spanish, and they are speaking the 3 languages. So I think that children can learn bilingual or multilingual if necessary. The problem, I think the question to raise is what quality of bilingual education and what resources you have for bilingual education.
Alice, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to respond to that. Our parents are desperate to have their children learn English. The parents at our center, after asking their local school for over a year to teach them English, and the school refused, finally pulled their children out of school and for 2 weeks kept them at the center. And this is not an easy thing for recent immigrants to do. It was a very, very difficult boycott. They were, by government mandate, put in programs that only taught them to read and write English from kindergarten through 5th grade, and unfortunately, the perception is that those families do not want to assimilate and do not want to learn English. Our families are desperate to learn English. They live in Spanish-speaking homes. The parents say they can teach the children Spanish. If the school is absolutely refusing, as is the case in Los Angeles, to teach the children to read and write English, then there is no way that child is going to learn it.
Parents have a choice to pull their kids out of a program whenever they choose.
Excuse
These parents
me,
had
they
a choice as
obviously
well.
don't. They
Well, you know
obviously
what?
don't.
What we're talking about here is taking anecdotal situations and turning it to your own advantage. That's not what we're talking about when we look at the education of children in the state of California and across this country.
I don't think anybody in this audience or anywhere else disagrees that English needs to be learned in the schools. No question about it.
Nor do I, and I'm sure neither does
And all of the people that are pro-bilingual believe the same thing.
Absolutely.
I think what they don't want is or what I'm hearing here today, that's the sum and substance of Ron's initiative, is you're like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, let's look at the reality of the situation. Bilingual education has been tried in California for 30 years, and it's failed miserably.
Well, I guess the question is being raised, then let's fix the system that isn't working.
That's what we're doing.
There's no
evidence. Well, no, you're getting
Ron,
rid
let me
of the
ask,
system.
why has bilingual education failed according to you?
Because the theory doesn't work in practice. Look,
now, is it because, according to you, it's not teaching English? Because you know what? The kids that were pulled out of the 9th Street School, Alice's school, are children who, 74 of which were pulled out. Only 3 of those kids are now being tested as proficient in English. Isn't that the case?
That is false.
That is the case.
Excuse me, can I say something?
So where's the advantage of your program?
Excuse me, can I say something? Let's talk about the reality of the current system. One reason so few children learn English is the schools right now in California are paid more money so long as children do not learn English. If a child learns English, the schools... Excuse me. If the child learns English, the schools lose funding, and that's the reason that they don't teach English to the children, or, in some cases, pretend that the children have not learned English even after they have. Now, look at all the different immigrant groups in California. There are children who enter the public schools speaking 140 different languages, but the only group of children that are given large quantities of native language, so-called bilingual instruction, are Latino Spanish-speaking children.
Oh, that's absolutely false. There are bilingual programs in every language out there.
There aren't.
Because they're in the communities, and the communities ask for the programs.
You are wrong.
No, you're lying.
No, okay, let me finish. Let me finish.
Well, you know what, Ron? We have to take a break.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. And I will say this as we go into the break. I'm horrified to think that this would be a political issue when it is the welfare of the student that's at the core of this issue. But we'll talk about more about that in a minute. Well, we got a raging debate here in the audience. So in the time that we have left, let's just take a quick poll. Chris, start with Paula.
Yes, hi. I've been bilingual since I was 5 years old, and this was in Mexico. I just moved here 8 months ago. And I'm wondering, in this country where there's so much money for research, why don't you take a look to other countries that have successful bilingual programs and try to apply that? Because in Mexico, there's a lot of children that in 6 months, 1 year, they're speaking English. And they're bilingual by 4, 5 years old. And in my house, no one spoke English. In my country, everything's done in Spanish, and I was bilingual. So I think we should take a look.
Good question, Paul. Unfortunately, I have to be rhetorical so we can get a few more opinions in here. Mary Lou?
I think it's really important that we focus on developing good bilingual programs. What the anecdotes people have talked about have been about bad bilingual education in which 2 languages are not acquired. I think there's evidence that from research about educational programs that there are really good ways to do bilingual education, and that's what we need to focus on. One of the most frightening things about the UNS initiative is that it can be brought to California with a 51% majority, but it will take 66% to get rid of it. So that for the foreseeable future, a questionable educational policy will be mandated. Nobody will be able to choose anymore.
Okay, Dan from California.
Yes, I just think it's unfair that we're asking the majority of people in California to make a decision on something that's going to only affect the minority.
Okay, and last but not least over here, Sandy and her husband Terry.
Well, we live in Florida, and for the time that I worked after I retired, I went to work for somebody. We would go down to Flagler and North Miami Avenue, which is the center of the city of Miami. And all we heard was Spanish. There's hardly anybody speaking English. And the problem I see there is that the people that hire people to work all speak Spanish, and that probably goes on in the offices also. So there's something lost someplace.
Okay, we've got to let that be the last word. I'm so sorry. And to our guests, thanks so much for participating, and we'll discuss this again, I'm sure. Thank you for joining us. I'm Bobby Batista. Enjoy your weekend. Miles O'Brien will be back on Monday. See you then.
I'm Yolanda Nava. Welcome to this special edition of Life and Times Tonight. Over the next hour, we'll look at the 3 most hotly debated initiatives on next Tuesday's ballot. Joining me tonight are my 3 co-hosts.
I'm Kerman Maddox. I'll be bringing you Proposition 227. This is the effort to end bilingual education in the state of California.
And I'm Kitty Feldy of KPCC Public Radio. I'll be handling Proposition 226, the battle over union dues.
And I'm Linda Breakstone, political reporter for CBS 2 News. I'll bring you the debate over Proposition 223, the measure that would cap school districts' administrative costs.
KPCC and CBS 2 News, along with KCET, are members of the Election Connection, a coalition of print and broadcast media throughout Southern California who have come together to help improve election coverage. We'd also like to invite you, our viewers, to get involved with this live program. If you have access to the internet, you can participate in a poll on the 3 propositions we're exploring tonight. The results of our survey will be announced tomorrow on Life and Times Tonight. You'll find the KCET website at www.kcet.org. This is the homepage of the KCET website. Just click on the Life and Times Tonight logo. Now to the issues. We begin with a brief background report on Proposition 227. Currently in California, 1 out of every 4 public school students speak a language other than English. Of these, about 30% receive some form of bilingual education.
Today, many immigrants work long hours.
Critics of the current system say bilingual education has failed a generation of non-English speaking students. So along with conservative businessman Ron Unz, they drafted Proposition 227. If passed, all public school instruction would be conducted in English. Students who do not speak English would enter immersion classes for 1 year, being taught in English quickly and intensively. After the year is up, students would be placed in mainstream classes.
The candidates for governor disagree on just about every issue, but they all agree Proposition 227 won't teach kids English.
But opponents of 227 argue 1 year of English immersion is not long enough to teach English well and could lead to classroom chaos. But the measure does provide an exception. Parents can insist that their children be taught in a bilingual setting. But to do so, they would have to sign a waiver, and that process is complex and time-consuming. Proposition 227 holds a commanding lead in statewide polls. Among registered voters, 63% approve of the measure, 24% oppose it.
Junta con nosotros en votando sí para la Proposición 227.
Yes for the children.
The initiative has turned California into a political battlefield. Mayor Reardon is spending $250,000 of his own money on Spanish-language TV ads backing the measure, while President Clinton has opposed it. And 1,000 LAUSD teachers have pledged to disobey 227 if it passes at the polls. Meanwhile, in the state legislature, a compromise bilingual bill was passed 3 weeks ago. It would have given school districts local control over their own bilingual programs. But that bill died when Governor Wilson vetoed it last week.
Well, obviously, there's a lot to discuss on Proposition 227. Again, the effort to end bilingual education in the state of California. Joining me now are Holly Thier. She's the statewide spokesperson for the No on Proposition 227. And Ron Unz, he's the chairman of the Yes on Proposition 227 campaign. Now, you each have 30 seconds for an opening statement. Mr. Unz, since you started this controversy, I'm going to start with you.
Bilingual education was a well-intentioned program, but it's failed after 30 years. Children are not learning English today, and there are only 2 choices before the voter: the status quo, which is a dismal failure, and our initiative, which ensures that all young children are intensively taught English as soon as they begin school. I urge everyone to vote for Prop 227 because the status quo doesn't work.
Okay, Ms. Thier, 30-second opening statement.
Actually, what's failed has been Proposition 227, where it's been tried. Proposition 227 will take all of California's limited English-speaking children, put them in a single classroom, children of all different ages, all different academic backgrounds, limit them to 180 days of English, deny them instruction in core curriculum, no math, no science, no history, and have them taught by teachers who can be sued just for teaching them.
Okay, Mr. Unz, I'd like to direct the first question to you because she makes the point that a lot of critics have said. They said your one-size-fits-all approach really eliminates some very good bilingual education programs that happen to exist. How do you respond to that criticism?
Bilingual education is a dismal failure in California, but California is a very large state. And in a state this large, you can find a few places where bilingual education actually works properly. There are probably a few dozen programs in the state where it works well, and those could continue under our initiative. Those parents who want their children placed or kept in a bilingual program can apply for a waiver. And for older children, it's easy. Some double immersion programs work. Those could survive under our initiative.
Okay, Ms. Thier, let me share with you some of the criticisms directed at your campaign. Some people say that these existing bilingual education programs actually are hurting students and it's harming their ability to learn English. That being the case, why would you want to support something that apparently isn't helping the students learn English?
Actually, there's a lot of good bilingual education programs that are helping children learn English today. Any parent that wants to take their child out of a bilingual education program can do so today. But if Proposition 227 passes, all children will be stuck in a Ron Unz one-size-fits-all classroom. In addition, this proposition takes all the money currently in bilingual education, puts it into Ron Unz's proposition, and then appropriates an additional $50 million a year for the next 10 years every year. It's one of the biggest government spending programs we've seen.
Okay, Mr. Unz, some people argue that the problem is not with bilingual education. They say there are a lot of good bilingual education programs. The problem was two things: lack of funding and not enough good bilingual education instructors in the system. Why not address that rather than trying to eliminate the entire bilingual education program?
First of all, nobody knows how much the state of California is spending on bilingual education, but it's certainly in the hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Some estimates would put the extra cost of bilingual programs at over $1 billion a year in the state of California. These programs don't work, and it's not through lack of funding. The programs have lots of problems. One of the problems, again, is that there are very few teachers who speak the 140 different languages necessary to implement bilingual education in California. It just physically can't be implemented. It's failed.
Okay, Ms. Thier, I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Sure. I think what's failed is Proposition 227. Out here in Los Angeles, the 9th Street Elementary School children that Ron Unz always talks about, those children, they have not learned English in the one-year immersion program. Only 2 out of 74, which is lower than the district average here at LA Unified School District and lower than the statewide average. Let's take Gloria Tuchman's children. Not one child moved out of her classroom into a mainstream classroom for last year, 1996-97. And what we're saying is let's give the children a chance.
Okay, Ms. Thier, Ms. Jones, I want to thank you. Now what we want to do is we want to move to our live audience. We have a number of people here from Southern California who have been very involved in this whole debate around Proposition 227. Kitty Feldy, I'm going to move to you. I believe you have a question.
Yes, Doug Laskin is with me. He has a question.
Yes, I'm a Los Angeles school teacher. I'd like to direct my question to Ron Unz. Ron, as I think you know, Los Angeles Unified's union, UTLA, had a referendum on 227 in which almost half the teachers, 48%, voted in favor of 227. What is your reading as you travel around the state of the sentiment of teachers in other districts?
We've received tremendous support from ordinary teachers up and down the state. This initiative divides the leaders from the ordinary people in all these organizations, the leaders of political parties, the leaders of establishment organizations, and the leaders of teachers' unions. I think we will win overwhelmingly on Election Day among the ordinary teachers and union members in Los Angeles and throughout the state.
Ms. Thier, I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to the same question.
I'd love to respond. I've actually debated Doug, and he's on the yes on Proposition 227 side. And actually, Ron Unz is misinformed because not one school district, not one teachers organization across the state of California has supported Proposition 227. The California Teachers Association opposes it. The California PTA opposes it. Every good government group, the League of Women Voters, opposes Proposition 227 because they know it won't teach children English. It hasn't taught children English where it's been tried. And they're saying, why impose a single statewide law that mandates children can only be taught one way?
Okay, very good. We're going to move back to our audience. Linda Breakstone.
Let's go to Martha Arevalo here. Martha, what was your question?
My question is for Holly Thier. You mentioned that $50 million for every year for 10 years will be taken out of the educational fund. Where is that money exactly going to come out of? What programs?
Yes, this is very important to recognize because Proposition 227 takes all the money that's spent on bilingual education today, puts it into Ron Unz's failed sink or swim program. On top of that, it appropriates an additional $50 million a year, every year, for the next 10 years to individuals who pledge to tutor a child in English. There's no accountability for that money. There's no process. And basically, you just sign a pledge card and you get some money. And that money will come from textbooks, from reducing class sizes, from putting public safety officers on the street. That money comes out of the general fund budget of the state of California.
Mr. Unz, sounds pretty risky. What about that?
Our opponents are so desperate now getting close to the election that they're making up the most ridiculous lies and distortions about our initiative. Our initiative will save hundreds of millions of dollars a year because that's the cost of these failed bilingual programs. By pulling the plug on the programs, we save the money. Then we use some of those savings, a few percent of those savings, give it to local school districts to fund adult English literacy programs. Normally, adult literacy programs are motherhood and apple pie, but our opponents think adult literacy programs are the worst part of our initiative, and that shows how desperate they are.
Ms. Thayer, pretty strong language. Lies and distortions?
You know, I think those are desperate statements by a desperate campaign that's going down on June 2nd. And what really is happening here is that Ron Unz has been moving away from what he's written into his initiative. And I'm sorry he didn't write a process for handing out that money, but that's a lot of money to hand out without a process, with no accountability, and with no strings attached. And taking money away from teaching children English, away from the schools, and giving it to individuals, the California Teachers Association, the PTA, every major educational organization thinks that that won't teach children English, and we agree.
Okay, Mr. Unz, quick response before I get back to the audience.
We have a secret weapon. It's called your voter pamphlet. It gives our arguments, the opposition arguments. It comes from the state of California, and it actually contains the text of our initiative. Read your voter pamphlet, and then you'll vote for us.
Okay, we're going back to the audience. Back to Kitty Feldy.
You bet. Cindy Aguirre has a question.
Yes, Mr. Unz, how do you account for the wealthy sending their children to bilingual schools or immersion schools?
Well, I think it's a very good thing for young children to learn more than one language, to learn important world languages like German, like Chinese, like Spanish. But it must be voluntary, and also the children must be taught English. What we call bilingual education in California often is Spanish-only instruction, where the children are taught almost no English, and that's something that their parents need for them to learn. We support programs that teach children English, but most of these bilingual programs fail to do that.
Ms. Thayer, your response?
Actually, the only program that Ron Unz supports is his own failed program. Now, across the state of California today, there are thousands of programs that are working, that are teaching children English. What we want is we want to take those programs and impose them, have people use those statewide. Right now, districts have the flexibility to choose between programs that are working and programs that are not working. If Proposition 227 passes, all of that choice, parental choice, teachers' choices, and local districts' choice will be taken away, and a single statewide law will be imposed.
Okay, we're going to go back to our audience. Back to Linda Breakstone.
This is prompting some things here. Rita Gaines?
Hi, my question is for Ron. He said there's 140 different languages, and there's not enough teachers to teach that. If you're going to put all the kids in the one-size-fit-all, are the teachers just going to be English-speaking teachers? How will they communicate with the kids with the 140 different languages?
Well, right now, under the current system, almost all of the students in the public schools in those languages receive no bilingual education. The only group of students that receive large quantities of bilingual instruction are Spanish-speaking children, yet they're the immigrant group that does the worst in school, partly because of the failings of bilingual instruction. If you take children from all these different language groups, you can teach them English together. It's a good thing if the teachers know the child's native language, but it's not essential. Bilingual programs don't work because you need a teacher to speak all of those 140 different languages, and that is physically impossible.
Ms. Thayer, your response?
Well, I'm glad Ron's not running for superintendent of public instruction. I know that he ran for governor and lost against Pete Wilson and has never stepped foot into a bilingual education classroom prior to drafting his Proposition 227. However, Proposition 227 will not teach children English. You're exactly right. The children will be speaking all different languages, all different backgrounds, all different ages in one classroom with a teacher that talks at them in English but doesn't teach them English. a certain amount of native language instruction actually helps children acquire English faster, as well as keep them current on their academic subjects.
Okay, let me get a response from Mr. Unz on that.
That's nonsense. Our initiative neither requires nor encourages children of different ages to be mixed together. The children are placed in intensive English classes. They're 5 or 6 years old in most cases. They're taught English very quickly and easily. And after a few months or a year, once they've learned enough English to be able to do regular schoolwork in English, they're moved into the regular classes with all the other students. That works. It's the standard in every other major country in the world. No one uses bilingual education except the United States. They don't use it because it's failed.
Okay, we're going to go back to our audience. Kitty Feldy.
And we have some input from the superintendent of the Long Beach schools, Carl Cohen. Mr. Cohen?
Mr. Unz, let's concede that the status quo needs fixing. Why is your new brand of state tyranny superior to local efforts to improve in this area?
The local districts are completely wedded to the failed system of bilingual instruction. A few months ago, the State Board of Education, under pressure from our initiative, decided to stop enforcing the mandatory bilingual law because it had expired 11 years ago. Now, we believe it's a good idea to stop enforcing a law which expired 11 years ago. But when they did so, every major school district in the state said that they would continue their bilingual programs because they were happy with their programs. LA Unified won't change a thing unless our initiative passes. It's our initiative or the status quo.
Okay, Ms. Thier, you want to respond to that?
Actually, voters do have a choice on June 2nd, and I think that the California League of Women Voters recognized that when they said no to Proposition 227. And what Proposition 227 will do is, for the first time in 11 years, impose a single statewide law dictating how children will be educated and how they will be taught English. It will limit them to just 180 days of English instruction. It will deny them any education in math, science, or history. They will forever be left 1 year behind their other children in the class, and it will also allow teachers to be sued just for doing their job, just for trying to teach kids English. We want the voters to give children a chance. Vote no on Proposition 227.
Okay, Ms. Thier, Mr. Jones, I want to thank you both for helping us with this discussion. I also want to thank members of the audience, because these are a number of people in Southern California who are very, very involved in this controversial initiative, Proposition 227, all about bilingual education. We are now going to move to Yolanda Nava.
Just about 9 minutes after the hour now. California voters tomorrow will be deciding the future of millions of school children in their state and could be setting a precedent for how the entire nation approaches integrating immigrants into American society.
Buenos días a todos.
California's Proposition 227 would effectively end that state's 25-year experiment with bilingual education. It would force immigrant children to learn English quickly so they can learn in English with students in the mainstream. Now, some fear the change is too abrupt.
How in the world can we expect all children after 1 year to be ready to just transition over?
And many still believe that bilingual education is the best way for kids to learn English while keeping up with their other subjects. This little girl spoke almost no English 3 years ago.
I like it because I learned very fast.
But this former principal is among those who think bilingual education holds kids back.
You have the students that are immersed in Spanish. It's not bilingual. They teach the subject matter content in Spanish for 3 or 4 years before they begin to get into the English end of it.
Even those who simply want whatever's best for the children are split on this.
More and more. Some of these kids have been in the courses for 5 and 6 and 7 years, and there's no improvement.
It's not better to come everybody together and stay with the bilingual program and just fix it?
Interesting debate. Let's look at it further. Joining us now from San Francisco is Ron Unz. He's a businessman, former California gubernatorial candidate who co-wrote Proposition 227 and chairs the English for the Children campaign. And from Los Angeles, Teresa Bastillo. She is a former judge, now with the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and she and the group oppose Proposition 227. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Great to be here.
Okay, let's assume we all want to do what's best for the kids. Ron, why don't we begin with you? Why is it better to immerse people totally in English rather than ease them into it?
Well, the current system is just a dismal failure. If you look at the official statistics from the State Office of Bilingual Instruction, a quarter of all the children in California public schools don't know English. And of the ones who don't know English, each year only 5 or 6% learn English. 95% of the children who start a given school year not knowing English have not learned it by the end of that school year, and much of the failure is because of the Spanish-only program called Bilingual Education.
But how do you know immersion will be better?
Well, it's the method used in every other major country in the world that has a large immigrant population. Germany and France and Britain and Australia and Canada and Israel all teach children the national language as quickly as possible once they begin school. None of them use what we call bilingual education. In the United States, the Catholic, the parochial schools use intensive English and they don't use native language instruction, and the results are much better than the bilingual programs in the public schools.
All right, Teresa, kids do learn languages easier than adults do. Can they do it through immersion?
It's not a matter of can they do it through immersion. It's a matter of the program that Mr. Unz has designed is a program that's only going to give kids 180 days to learn English before they're transferred to classrooms taught completely in English. There's absolutely no research support for the proposition that kids can learn enough English, be literate in English, to compete in English-only classrooms in 180 days. The problem with Mr. Unz's proposal is that it's a one-size-fits-all solution that doesn't take into consideration local needs, local students, local resources, and doesn't build upon those rich local resources to ensure that our children are going to learn English and learn academics like math and science, because it's math and science that are so important if we're going to compete in this technological age. And the initiative is silent about academics.
Okay, but Teresa, I mean, you've had 25 years of trying to get bilingual education to reach these aims. The most recent numbers show that it's just not working in a large number of cases.
But you know what? Only 30% of the limited English proficient children in California are even in bilingual education programs. And there are numerous examples of bilingual education programs that work. There are also numerous examples of other programs in this state that work. This initiative is going to wipe out every single program in California except those that fit this very rigid 180 days, only one chance to learn English, or you're out.
Ron, I should give you the chance to respond to that.
Well, a lot of that is nonsense. The initiative doesn't say 180 days anywhere in the initiative. It says for young children it normally should take a year or less to learn enough English to be mainstreamed in with the other kindergarten students. Now, if it takes more time, they can stay in this intensive English program for a longer period of time. Also, the current system is just a dismal failure. The children are not learning English today, and in fact, for Latino children who don't know English in elementary school, approximately 70% are in these Spanish-oriented programs. And Latino immigrants are the one group given a lot of bilingual education, and they're one immigrant group that does worse than all the other immigrant groups, because the others are taught English, while Latino children are taught Spanish.
Well, Teresa, let me ask you, I mean, English is the language of commerce increasingly in the world. It's a language of computers. Isn't it better to have these kids better at English faster?
What is better is for these kids to know English well. If they're going to compete in schools, if they're going to compete in this global economy, they have to know how to speak English well. And while Ron may wish that his initiative said what he just said, it does not. It specifically says normally one school year. One school year in California means 180 days, and he knows it. So if he's reconstructing his initiative, that's wishful thinking on his part. And that is really the issue. These kids are only going to have 1 year to learn English, and they're silent about academic achievement. It also appropriates $50 million to teach adults English if they simply pledge to tutor their kids.
Ron, last word to you in this case. Do you think if this passes tomorrow and the polls show that it might, that it'll have implications in the rest of the country?
Tremendously so. Half of all the bilingual programs in the country are in California. They're a dismal failure here. If they end in California, I think they'll be reconsidered everywhere else in the United States.
Okay, Ron Unz, Teresa Basteos, thanks very much for being with us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, menopause. It may strike earlier and affect your waistline more than you think. What to do about it when Good Morning America continues.
Good morning. Should we be teaching our school kids only in English? That's the question before California voters whose decision on bilingual education will be closely watched today, Tuesday, June 2nd, 1998.
From NBC News, this is Today with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer, live from Studio 1A in Rockefeller Plaza.
And good morning. Welcome to Today on this Tuesday morning. I'm Matt Lauer.
And I'm Katie Couric. California is often a bellwether state, so a lot of people are keeping a close eye on this vote, aren't they?
That's right. They're voting on Proposition 227 today. A yes vote will mean an end to bilingual education in that state. A no vote means bilingual education continues. There is much at stake for non-English speaking students, and we'll look at both sides of this issue coming up in a few minutes.
As voters head to the polls today in 8 states, there is a key ballot measure in California. If Proposition 227 passes, the state's bilingual education programs will end. NBC's Mike Betcher has details.
1.5 million California students do not speak English. Many are educated with a combination of English and their mother tongue, ranging from Korean to Spanish. But if Proposition 227 is approved today, bilingual education in California will be banned. English only the rule. The drive is spearheaded by computer millionaire Ron Unz, who believes bilingual education has been a failure.
We have to pull the plug on this failed experiment and instead shift over to a system which ensures that children are taught English as quickly as possible once they begin public schools in California.
But opponents of the proposition, while admitting bilingual education has not been a complete success, argue that there will be an even bigger disaster if English only becomes the law in California.
In an educational system that's already, in bad need of reform, it's only going to make the matter worse. It's not going to teach any kid English any sooner.
Polls show Proposition 227 will likely be approved. But if it is, opponents say they will challenge its constitutionality in court. Mike Betcher, NBC News, Los Angeles.
Katie, now to a vote that's being closely watched around the country. Californians today will vote on whether or not to abolish bilingual education for the state's school children. Henry Gordias is an educator in Southern California, and Waldemar Rojas is superintendent of schools in San Francisco. Gentlemen, good morning to you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Dr. Rojas, let me start with you. You're in favor of continuing bilingual education, even though critics say it does not work. Why do you think it does work?
Well, it absolutely works because our students are performing at or above national average when given the opportunity. Bilingual education is the process of allowing non-English speaking children to learn content areas in math, science, and social studies while they're acquiring English, and they go through that phase of learning language. This proposition is ill-founded, has no research, and clearly, people do not learn academic English in the course of 1 year.
Let me just go over what you said. In other words, these students are taught things like math and sciences in their native language while they're learning English at the same time. But the critics say that doesn't teach them English fast enough.
Well, the critics contend that it doesn't, but on average here in San Francisco, we find that between the 4th and 5th year, that children become fluent in English. You can't speed that process up of actually learning language. And what the critics refuse to admit is that they have no program, that the issue that they're talking about in building this class that's a Tower of Babel is that they hope that the children will learn. In actuality, California had this before 1967, and the reality is that 50% of the Latino students never succeeded, never accomplished, and never completed high school. Now the dropout rate is cut in half, and academic achievement is occurring.
Dr. Gordias, let me let you comment on some of what Dr. Rojas has just said.
Well, in the first place, what is happening is some of the biggest problems that I have seen has been the lack of individuals learning English well enough. I'm not talking about learning English, survival English. Anybody can do that after they've been in this country for a few years. What I'm looking at is being able to speak, read, and write the English language, well enough. Problems that I ran into in a major high school in East Los Angeles, where I was principal for many years, was the fact that these individual students that came into our school not knowing English, not learning well enough English to be able to move ahead, gave us tremendous problems. We abolished bilingual education in that school. We abolished it, and in place of it, we gave it strong ESL support, which
When
means
you abolished
English.
it, the parents were furious, and you basically said to them, I know you're mad now, but give me a year and take a look at the results.
That is true. I said to them, you only have 3 years to teach the students well enough. If we immerse them in one whole year of English, give them 3 or 4 hours a day, add this up with after-school activities, and then put them into regular English-speaking classes. See, what happens is when you begin to teach a student in Spanish only, bilingual classes, those classes will never translate into English. You only have 3 years in a high school. The problem is that when these kids take these basic courses, basic math, basic science courses, they never get those uplifting courses such as algebra.
Okay, Dr.
Mr.
Rojas,
Gradius, bilingual education says bilingual. It's not a matter of teaching the children only in Spanish. It's a matter of giving them math, science, social studies, rigorous academic content that's credit-bearing.
You can't give them rigorous.
While they're being
Rojas, you
taught
can't give them
English.
rigorous academic
While
courses that they don't know English yet. What you're doing,
sir, could
what
you
you're
learn
doing
another language in a year?
Yes. Most of the students in one-year immersion program will learn sufficient English at the same time giving them regular English classes. If you give them bilingual classes...
You would be the only one anywhere from Middlebury College in Vermont to the Monterey Defense Language Institute to Stanford University to UC Berkeley.
Listen, you're bringing the Language Institute. I know the Monterey Language Institute.
The question really is not if you can learn an entire language in a year. Isn't the question, can you learn enough of that language to be proficient and then learn other subjects in that language?
Well, you can't learn enough English to deal with mathematical equations and to deal with biological terminology in the course of a year.
But so what are you going to do? You're going to teach
dealing
that
with
in
socialization
Spanish?
English.
When does it transfer over into English?
Remember that when this nation woke up and these fellows were hanging around the moon, they were called cosmonauts, the math and science was okay in Russian. You believe you actually can't learn math and science in other languages?
No, but why waste the time in learning other languages? The problem is we don't have teachers.
Learning other languages.
We don't have teachers qualified enough in Spanish to teach bilingual chemistry, bilingual physics. You must teach it in English so that the universities will accept it. This is what I found out, and I think you know too, as superintendent of San Francisco.
Doesn't speak English.
The universities are not going to accept bilingual classes, bilingual biology, bilingual life science, bilingual mathematics. Ridiculous. The
bilingual classes are very much accepted by the universities.
Test in English. UCLA has a Sunday exam that says unless you learn sufficient English, you will not be admitted.
Let me try this with you. In California, isn't the bilingual education system seen as almost a remedial type of course, where in other states, it's looked at as a way to enhance the student's life by allowing them to learn 2 languages?
Exactly. See, when bilingual education started 30 years ago, I was asked to come in 1972 to Garfield High School to teach a class in bilingual biology. How ridiculous. Biology is based on Greek, it's based on Latin, la vena cava, la aorta, el microscopio. Why waste a whole year teaching it bilingually? Teach it in English. They know how to speak Spanish.
Rojas,
what they need is English.
Dr.
And
Rojas,
now
I'm going to give you the
kill 2
last
birds
word.
with 1 stone. You
Dr.
get the credit to
hold on 1
graduate,
second,
and
please.
you get the college prerequisite.
Dr. Gradius, 1 sec. Dr. Rojas, go ahead. I'll give you the last word.
Well, Dr. Gradius would actually have you believe that you can learn language in a year. That's what this initiative is about.
And
it's foolish. Rojas. It doesn't work. And
little kids.
Absolutely, the youngsters can learn. What he has and what he had in his high school was lots of youngsters taking courses which were not credit-bearing, and they put them in the sink or swim model, which in actuality in California, most of the youngsters sank.
And I'm going to have to make that the last word. Dr. Gradius, Dr. Rojas, thank you very much. The vote on Proposition 227 is today in California.
Primary election day in 8 states across the country, with California among the states being watched closely for results that may resonate in this November's congressional elections and future presidential campaigns. 2 potential trend-setting issues are on the California ballot. One would require unions to get approval from their members before giving political donations, a move designed to cut into the Democratic Party's support base. The other ballot issue would virtually end bilingual education in California schools, as CBS's Sandra Hughes reports.
Travell! 5-year-old Travell Louis has boundless energy, but his father fears the enthusiastic youngster is losing interest in school because he doesn't understand all that he's being taught in his bilingual kindergarten.
Well, they speak a lot of Chinese.
And why don't you like that?
And I can't, because I can't speak it and I get right and I'm confused.
Trevel's dad, George, was very upset when he arrived at the Oakland school one day to find Trevel's teacher speaking Cantonese for most of the class.
Since he's been in this Cantonese bilingual class, he seems to be going backwards.
George Louis is suing the Oakland School Board, demanding an English-only class for Trevel. The lawsuit has thrust this ethnically diverse community, where 1/3 of the student population is not fluent in English, into the center of the debate over Proposition 227. The ballot initiative would eliminate the current bilingual system. In California, immigrant students gradually learn English while they still are taught other subjects in their native language. Under Proposition 227, these kids would be placed in a 1-year intensive English immersion class as soon as they begin school. Oakland educators say that would spell disaster for hundreds of thousands of immigrant children.
It would take a kid with no background in English, give them a 1 year in an unproven program to learn English, and then they're out in the sea by themselves.
But even parents of immigrant children think their kids might learn English faster with the old sink or swim approach used to teach children in years past. And some parents of English-speaking kids fear their children are losing out too.
He's wasted a whole year and received absolutely no education at all.
Even if California voters pass Proposition 227 today, it will most likely be tied up in court for years. So it won't make a difference for Trevel Louis, who already has next year's assignment, a bilingual first grade. Sandra Hughes, CBS News, Oakland, California.
Welcome to Century Communications Election 1998 special. When we go to the polls on June 2nd, we have a lot to choose from in this open blanket primary. All these 8 parties and all their candidates running for all these statewide offices. So make the democracy work. Go vote on June 2nd. Also, we have 9 propositions, of which 2 or 3 are the most controversial, and one of them that we've heard the most about is the one we're going to talk about today. That's Proposition 227. 227 is better known as the UNS Initiative or the Bilingual Education Initiative. Joining me are 4 people, 2 for and 2 against. Sit back during this half hour and let's learn about this particular prop. And they are Ron Unz, who is the author of it. He's chairman of English for the Children. Good to have you, Ron.
Great to be here.
We have Holly Thier, who's with the Citizens for an Educated America, who's against the prop. We have Henry Gridalis, who's a former principal from Garfield High, who's also in favor of this proposition. And we have Shelley Spiegel-Coleman, who's also with the Citizens for an Educated America, who's also against it. Good to have you, Shelley.
Nice to be here.
And viewers, as we do our homework, and we must do our homework in a democracy, that's the only way we can engage ourselves in the political process. We have to spend some time. Not only should we look at this document, but for sure read this one. This one has pros and cons and ups and downs and people for and against these different props. You have to sit back in your living room and read this before you go vote. This does tell you a lot. We're now going to read together, if we would, Proposition 227 in the book, just as you will see the label on the ballot when you go pull those levers on June the 2nd. And let's read together Proposition 227. English Language in Public School Initiative Statute requires all public school instruction be in English unless parents request otherwise and show certain circumstances. Provides short-term English immersion programs for children learning English. Funds community English instruction. Fiscal impact on individual and school district would depend on how schools, parents, and the state respond to the proposition's changes. These impacts could vary significantly by district. Total state spending on education, however, probably would not change. That's what we will see on the ballot, and we have to go yes or no. Well, we're going to start with Ron Unz, and we're going to ask him, A, is this exactly what you thought it should be on the ballot in terms of the language used, and explain why you put this on the ballot.
Sure. Well, I think that's a very reasonable description of our initiative. What our initiative does is to shift California away from its failed system of bilingual education, which emphasizes native language instruction, sometimes for years at a time, and instead takes most young children as soon as they start school, and if they don't know English, teaches them English as quickly as possible. It places them in intensive, sheltered English immersion programs, and once they've learned enough English to do regular schoolwork in that language, they're shifted over to the regular classes. I think bilingual education has been a dismal failure in California after 30 years of trying to make it work, and I think children should be taught English as quickly as possible, and that's what most of their parents want.
Okay, but saying that, you know, people got the message. You kind of hit the bell with putting this on the ballot. The legislature scurried about and came up with a strategy that suggests there's different things for different school districts depending upon the different resources and the different types of kids they have. And also Dan Lundgren, who's going to probably be the Republican nominee for governor, said one shoe fits size doesn't work, we need more flexibility, so he said no. Your response to that?
Well, I think the fact that political leaders of both parties have been reluctant to support the initiative, I think is for the same reasons that they've been reluctant to say or do anything about bilingual education for the last 30 years, despite its manifest failure. With regard to the initiative and the best policy of changing the system, if we simply tell local school districts, do whatever you want, nothing would change in California. Almost all the large school districts in the state, especially the Los Angeles Unified School District, which has half of all the bilingual student programs in the state, they are absolutely and totally committed to this failed system of bilingual education. And they have publicly said that if they can do whatever they want, they will change nothing at all. They say their system works when the statistics show that it doesn't.
Okay, now, Holly, why are you against this initiative when he does make the point it's been in place for 30 years, and let's face it, kids are graduating who can't speak English or even write in English, so why not immerse them into this and learn it? Because kids learn quickly, you know, and they can learn lots of languages like they do in Europe. They can speak 2 or 3 different languages. Why not go along with this? Why are you against it?
Certainly. Proposition 227 is probably the biggest government spending program that we've seen in a long time, and it's failed where it's been tried. So the problem is not that it sets up English immersion. The problem is that it's a 180-day sink or swim program. It limits children to only 1 academic year of English. It denies them instruction in core curriculum, and then it allows teachers to be sued if any language other than English is spoken in the classroom. Now, on top of that, it also appropriates an additional $50 million a year, every year for the next 10 years, for individuals who pledge to tutor a child in English. So these people, they don't have to tutor 1 child in English. They just have to sign a pledge card and say, I'm going to tutor a child in English. Now, what Ron Unz is saying is that teachers don't know how to teach. Teachers know best how to teach children English.
Wait a minute, if teachers know best how to teach kids English, why haven't they been doing it?
Actually, they have been doing it. There's some very good bilingual education programs out there today. There's some good English immersion programs that have actually taught children English. There is no program that limits children to 180 days, denies them instruction in core curriculum, mixes children of different ages, different academic backgrounds, that has successfully taught children English. In fact, Ron Unz's program was tried in Alice Callahan's kids, the children that opted out of 9th Street Elementary School.
Right.
They have failed to teach those children English. Out of the 74 students that returned, 2 moved out of that classroom in last year, 1996-97, and actually learned enough English to move into a mainstream classroom. That's 2.7%, which is less than the district average and less than the state average. And Ron Unz's co-author, Gloria Tuchman, her children, zero, not 1 child moved out of her class, and this is the classroom after which Proposition 227 was modeled after. Not 1 child moved out of that class into a mainstream classroom. So her redesignation rate is 0%. So, you know, I think Attorney General Dan Lundgren, who called this proposition a straitjacket for educators and questioned the need for it in light of SB 6 and in light of the State Board of Education's decision, he knows that parents, teachers, and local districts know best how to teach children English. That's why the League of Women Voters and the PTA are against it.
All right, Holly, hold that point. And also, Ron, I do want you to take little notes on this and respond to it. But let's go to you, Henry. Henry, a lot of people, are you Latino?
Yes.
Okay. Well, a lot of people say it's another immigrant bashing, anti-Latino method. In fact, most of the Latino leadership, the elected assembly majority leader Antonio Villagrosa and some of the others have said it's another wedge issue. But you're in favor of it. Explain why.
I'm strongly in favor of it because I have seen the detriment that the young kids that come to this country are put into Spanish-only classes, particularly at a young age. An age where the window of opportunity of really, truly learning English, not just how to speak it. Most people that will remain in this country for any length of time will learn how to speak English. The trouble is survival English only. They don't know how to speak it well enough to be able to master it, to be able to get a job. Not only that, if they don't teach them English in the beginning, let's say when they're in kindergarten, first and second grade, and the vast majority of the kids, 60%, are in that category, Latinos in elementary school, if they don't get that opportunity to learn English, how to read it and write it at that early age, you miss that window of opportunity. What happens then, these students at some later time, my opponents say, will begin to learn English a lot faster. It doesn't work in practicality. What happens is these kids, by the time they get into 5th and 6th grades, they haven't learned English well enough. They haven't kept up with subject matter content. What happens when they get to junior high, I know what the counselors do. They will put them in remedial courses. They will put them in classes that are not elevated. By the time they get to high school, there isn't a good percentage of those kids that will ever take chemistry, physics, algebra, because they can't understand the reading, they can't understand the writings, they can't understand enough English to be able to pass those courses.
In other words, you're telling me in the LA Unified School District, let's talk about that for a minute, which has about 800,000 students and all of that, and about 68% are Latino, that if they're coming to that school in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, if they can't speak English, they put them in a Spanish-only class. Is that what they're doing?
That's what they do. The worst thing is that in one of the classes that I visited earlier this week, one of the classes of first graders, 60% of those 20 kids were born here in Los Angeles. When did we get to the point that these kids born here that know some English? Because they look at Sesame Street, they watch programs, they speak with each other. Obviously, they have a lot of Spanish background because their parents speak Spanish to them.
Right.
But they get into the school district, and what do? They learn primarily not only subject matter content in Spanish, but they're spoken Spanish to by their teachers. When are they going to learn the English that they should learn? And they were born here. They're American citizens. Why deny them that right to learn English first?
Well, let's just take that to you, Shelley. He's making a point. I mean, the kids learn their culture, language at home. They start kindergarten in first grade, and instead of being taught in English, they're taught in that language, whatever it may be. Doesn't that sound stupid?
Well, you know what? It would be illegal if that kind of thing took place, because our present system absolutely requires from the day that children enter our schools that they absolutely get English language development daily, and that as the years progress, more and more of their education is done in English. But the point here is that we don't have that program on our ballot. When people go into the polls on June 2nd, they're not voting yes or no on LA Unified's program. They're voting yes or no on Prop 227. And what Prop 227 does is something entirely different. It says, put all the children, 6th graders with kindergartners, 12th graders with 9th graders, 8th graders with 6th graders, throw them all together in a classroom and teach them for only 1 year, 180 days. Now, I've asked Ron Unz at other debates before, find me one classroom, one school, one program that he can point to that after 180 days, kids are ready to be in a regular mainstream program with your children in mind, and they can compete with native speakers. There is no program that has ever proven that you can do that. Now, if he had put on the ballot a mandate for making schools do all the programs that work, then we would be really happy here. We would all be voting for this proposition. But instead, he put on an idea that has never been proven, and when it's been tried, has failed. Now, that's our problem with it. Not that everybody has to be in a bilingual program or an English immersion program. Our program is we have something on the ballot that people are voting for that's been tried and has failed, and now he's mandating it for 1.4 million children.
It sounds pretty logical, but let's face it, Shelley, the kids are graduating and they can't write and speak fluently in English. Therefore, they can't integrate into the job market. They really have a hard time making it in society. The whole idea is to get them to speak the language of the country.
There's no question about it that some of our programs are more successful than others. One thing we have to keep in mind, though, is 70% of all the children here in California who need to learn English to be fluent, 70% of them are in English-only programs right now. A very small percentage of all the kids in this state of California ever see the inside of a bilingual program. So we're talking about all these children who need an improved education, and we're blaming it on a very small number who are in one type of a program. What we have to say is that in general, we have to, and I think Mr. Diaz would agree with this, we have to elevate the kinds of courses that we offer children. For many of the kids who you're talking about, the schools don't even offer them the courses that they need. Whether or not it's in English or another language is another issue. What we need to do is look at the successful programs and model other schools after that. Not take a failed system, one that doesn't work, 180 days, give it to every single child, one size fits all, when we know it doesn't work.
Well, how about that, Ron? I mean, one size doesn't fit all, and 180 days immersion has not proven that successful in some of the places. Why not have various strategies? Why not let the legislature now, which has come up with some other ideas? You've heard, again, the opposition's position.
Most of the claims made of our initiative are complete falsehoods or distortions. That really is the truth. For example, our initiative in no way encourages or requires children of different ages to mix together. That's a complete falsehood. It doesn't say it in the initiative. Second of all, our initiative does not limit children to only 1 year of sheltered English immersion. If they have not learned enough English after 1 year, they can stay in the program for a longer period of time. If they need 2 or 3 years, their parents can apply for a waiver to keep them in the program for a longer period of time. They're only moved out of the program once they've learned enough English to be able to do regular schoolwork in English. But since the overwhelming majority of the children who don't know English in California public schools come into the schools when they're 5 or 6 years old, they're in kindergarten or the first grade. At that age, it's very quick and easy to learn enough English to be mainstream. Kindergarten children don't need to learn advanced academic English to be able to keep up with other kindergarten students.
Okay, how about that, Holly? On both points, he said, first of all, it's not true that all ages are put together in one thing, and then he says if they don't get it together in that, they still have more time to do it.
And I think Ron Unz regrets the fact that he wrote his initiative the way he does, because it very clearly says that children have only 180 days to learn English.
Okay, Ron, what about that? It doesn't say it. We have a secret weapon. It's called your ballot pamphlet. Read your ballot pamphlet. Read the text of the initiative. These charges are utterly false.
Actually, I really want the voters to read the ballot handbook, because it does say very clearly that children are limited to 180 days, that children of different ages will be mixed into a classroom. And I think Ron Unz regrets that, because, you know, before he wrote this, he had never even stepped foot into a bilingual education classroom. He's not an educator. He's a wealthy millionaire who ran for governor and lost. And, you know, I think he would have written a very different initiative if he had done what Shelley said. Look at the programs that are working, that are successful, and put those on the ballot. But why limit children? Why deny children the same educational opportunity that every other child gets when they come to the schoolhouse door, simply because they don't know English? And these are children that may be native English speakers.
Ron?
Oh, let's look at the facts right now. Again, almost half of the students in bilingual programs in the state of California are in Los Angeles. Los Angeles Unified did a major internal study on the effectiveness of its programs. They looked at all the students who had started kindergarten in a bilingual program. And after 6 straight years at the same elementary school in the same bilingual program, almost 2/3 of the children had still not learned enough English to even take a test. That's 6 years in bilingual education. If we look at the statewide numbers, today in the state of California, 1/4 of all the children in public schools don't know English. And each year, of the ones who don't know English, only 5 or 6% learn it. 95% of the children who start a school year not knowing English have not learned it by the end of that school year. Furthermore, when you're looking at Los Angeles, it's not a small fraction who are in bilingual education. The figures I've seen show that if you're talking about Latino children who don't know English in Los Angeles, who are in elementary school, almost 80% of them are in these bilingual programs that don't work.
Shelley?
First of all, his figures are not true. And second of all, if you just read from his initiative, it says very clearly here, this is a temporary transition period not normally intended to exceed 1 year. Now that means you have to be abnormal to get more than 1 year, because the normal track will be a year. Now we have Gloria Tuchman, the co-author of this bill. She has the English immersion program that this is modeled after. She's a first grade teacher. She's been all over the state saying all her children do exceptionally well after 1 year in her classroom. So we looked at her kids. After last year, not one child in her classroom in first grade had enough English to make this transition. Now that means her whole classroom would be abnormal. They would have to go for a waiver. Now, but let me tell you something else about her classroom. She's a first grade teacher.
Right.
They all had kindergarten. So her kids already had a 2-year program. They're all going on to a second grade English immersion program. They're going to have 3 years now. Now, Ron suggests that all of her families should go year after year pleading for a waiver because districts don't have to grant them. So, in fact, Ron Unz's Alice Callahan was quoted as saying, the language acquisition process is 3 years. Now we've got abnormal kids needing 3 years, supposedly. Jaime Escalante, when he was interviewed by La Opinion a week and a half ago, said that when Ron came and showed him this initiative, he told him the problem with this initiative, he liked it, but the big problem with it was the 1-year requirement, that he did not think kids could do it in 1 year. He even used his own son as an example. His own son needed 3 years with all the advantages of having Escalante as a father.
Henry, I mean, look, you don't want, you know, when we talk about Latino bashing, for this to turn out to be one of these situations where they're discriminated against.
No, I understand that, but the biggest situation I see, and if we're talking about what happens in the later years, if you have 3 years or 4 years in a high school, many of the students come in at that particular age. I have been in a high school where the student is placed in an ESL class for 2 hours a day. He remains in there for a year. In the meantime, he's given some bilingual classes and maybe bilingual math and bilingual this and the other. But many times they have told me it's longer. It's going to take longer than this 1 year. Well, obviously, they're only teaching 2 hours a day. But if you were to immerse that kid in an entire year, to also include summer school, to also include support services after school, like we did in the school where I was principal, what happens then is this kid now masters English a lot faster, a lot sooner, and can now begin to take the courses that are necessary for him to go on and get a better education. What happens, though, if he doesn't learn English on this 2 hour a day, usually it takes 2 to 3 years. They stay in ESL for that length of time. In the meantime, they're not subject to taking the courses and classes in algebra and physics and chemistry because they can't understand it. So what happens, the kid graduates or gets out of school with not learning anything to move him along in the educational ladder. What I proposed to the schools, and I'm a consultant in this area, is to put him into that 1 year, an intensive ESL program for 1 year, move him along at the same time. Why not give him biology? Why does biology have to be bilingual? The universities don't accept bilingual biology. If you give him biology, he already knows Spanish. Biology is based on Latin and Greek. La vena cava, la aorta, el microscopio, the microscope. These are words that are Latin, they're Greek. Why should the kid that already knows Spanish be given biology in Spanish? Give it in English. At the same time, improve his English. So at least by the time he gets to graduate from high school, he will have had a good percentage of the courses already under his belt, and the knowledge of English has increased. He could then go to a college, maybe not in many a 4-year university, but why not go into a community college? And many will be able to go to a Cal State, a California State College, because he has sufficiently mastered English. He can read the test. He can get a higher score on the SATs. If you don't know how to read and write English well enough, how are you going to get a high enough score in the SATs? It was pitiful to see kids after 3 and 4 years of instruction in Spanish and bilingual try and take an SAT and they score 300.
Holly,
my gosh, you get 200 just to sit for the test.
Holly, I mean, you know, the logic is when you immerse somebody in it and you're young, you can absorb this. You immerse, you learn. Not 2 hours, not over a bunch of years, confusion to the kid. You know, kids can learn musical instruments. They can learn 3 or 4 or 5 languages if they're given all of the kind of support. It makes sense to some degree. How do you counter what he just said?
Right. I think what makes sense is teaching children English, and we all want our children to learn English. What doesn't make sense is Proposition 227's approach. Now, to only give children 180 days, there's no one in the state of California, except for Ron Unz, that will tell you a child can learn English in 180 days. Now, Mr. Gradias does not believe that children really need to know science, that they don't need to be taught science in their native language. However, you know, my father's a science educator, and if a child doesn't understand what you're trying to communicate, they're not going to pick up science. Proposition 227 would keep children a year behind in their academic studies at least. It would deny them any additional English instruction, And what it would do is continue the failure that we have seen in where this program has been tried. Now, Ron Unz just told us that there was a 95% failure rate of all the bilingual education programs. Now, what he's really saying is that English-only instruction fails, because 70% of the children he's talking about are in English-only classrooms today.
How about that,
And
Ron?
he's saying they don't learn English in 1 year. That's what that rate means. It means 5% of the children after 1 year of a bilingual education program or an English immersion program move out of that program into a mainstream classroom. Now, Ron Unz is calling that a failure. 70% of the children are in English immersion programs, some, sink or swim programs like Prop 227. So he's saying his own program is a failure.
Ron,
that's
help us out.
That's not true at all. Only a quarter of the children in California are in English-oriented programs. And again, the students in the bilingual programs do much worse because they're spending their time not being taught English. But one of the biggest problems with the current system is under current policy, schools are paid more money so long as children don't learn English. Schools lose funding once a child is reclassified as having learned English. Therefore, they have a tremendously perverse incentive either to not teach children English or to pretend that students have not learned English once they have. In fact, in Gloria Tuchman's classroom, the reason those children are not reclassified, even though they've learned how to read and write English, is because that school district has a policy of not reclassifying any children as having learned English until they're in the 3rd or 4th grade, so they can keep the money going into the system.
You know what, that's not correct, because right at Gloria's school there was a 1st grader that was redesignated last year because that child was ready, but that child was not in Gloria's classroom. It's not the policy not to redesignate kids or not to say they're fluent enough to go into the program. It's just not true. And what this is going to do over here is this is going to take, again, children, high school kids, if we talk about high school kids, 9th graders through 12th graders, spend a whole year with them just learning English. They're not going to get the science and the math courses that are required for that grade level. What in essence happens to high school kids, a child who doesn't speak English, we will now have to tell them that high school is no longer a 4-year situation. High school now is 5 years, because they will not earn the credits they need towards graduation if they spend a whole year in this program. And this program requires a very specific sheltered English classroom, not departmentalized. That's not what this says at all. So they're going to be lagging behind, and even if you read the larger pamphlet over there, legislative analyst pamphlet, even the legislative analyst says that there is a distinct possibility that because of this program, children will need intensive work after this 1 year to catch up in their courses. And they're really speaking very specifically to our older students.
Okay, final comment, Henry.
The problem that I see here is that they're just interested in graduation credits. What happens is they say that the kids will not be able to take these other advanced courses. You're right. Keeping them in a bilingual program, keeping them in Spanish-only classes will prevent them from taking those higher level courses. What happens is they will be given credit for math by taking consumer math, basic math, remedial math, beginning math, which is ridiculous. Or they give them a course in life science, which is no higher than 6th grade or 7th grade. It's a ridiculous course. No university will ever take any of these courses as far as prerequisites. What happens is that, yes, they will get those courses and say, you've satisfied your science requirement, you've satisfied your math requirement. At the miserable remedial level, that's ridiculous. What these kids need is to satisfy those requirements not only for graduation credits, but also for what? For university status.
Final comment, Holly.
You know, Proposition 227 is not the way to go. On June 2nd, you will have an opportunity, everyone, all of us will have an opportunity to vote. And don't listen to Ron Unz, don't listen to us. Read the language and think about the children and vote no on Proposition 227. It's a big government spending program. It has failed where it has been tried. Right now the state has the authority, the local districts have the opportunity to decide how best to educate children in English. President Clinton, Dan Lundgren agree. Vote no on Prop 227.
Final comment.
Bilingual education doesn't work. Proposition 227 is the only way of ensuring that children in California are taught to read and write and speak English as soon as they start school. Vote yes on 227.
Okay, I want to tell us, this is for us now. You know, you've heard both sides. They were articulate on both sides. I'm a bit confused. I'm sure you are too. Read this. It'll give you a better understanding. It'll help you reflect on it, and go vote on June 2nd and make the democracy work. I want to thank the 4 of you very much for sharing your points of view with the viewer voter voter out there. Appreciate it very much. And I especially want to thank you for sharing your time with us. God bless you, and bye-bye.
This is a Channel 7 special presentation, the debate over bilingual education. And now, your moderator, Dan Ashley.
And good evening. Hope you've enjoyed your Sunday afternoon. I'm Dan Ashley, and on behalf of all of us at Channel 7 News, welcome to tonight's debate on Proposition 227. During the next half hour, we'll be examining both sides of one of the most important and perhaps controversial initiatives on this Tuesday's ballot. Proposition 227, which could end most bilingual education programs in California public schools. This measure, if passed, would impact more than 1.4 million children in California who are not proficient in English. And we certainly hope tonight's discussion will help you make up your mind about how to vote on Tuesday. And joining us now to speak in favor of Prop 227 is Ron Unz. He's the principal author of the initiative and the chairman of the English for the Children campaign. Mr. Unz is also the CEO and chairman of Wall Street Analytics. That's a Palo Alto financial software company. Sitting to his right is Fernando Vega, the regional chairman for Yes on 227, English for the Children. He is a former Redwood City School Board member who helped implement bilingual education in the early 70s. And speaking against Prop 227 is Holly Thier, the statewide spokesperson for Citizens for an Educated America, No on 227. Ms. Thier is a former San Francisco deputy city attorney who comes from a family of educators. And to her left is Shelley Spiegel-Coleman, a member of the Executive Committee for Citizens for an Educated America, No on 227. Now, she is also a consultant to the Los Angeles County Office of Education in English as a second language. Thanks to all of you for joining us tonight. We're glad you're here and looking forward to your views, particularly you, Ms. Spiegel-Coleman. I know your plane just landed, so we're glad you made it. It was a photo finish to the end. Now, before we get to the debate, we want to give you some background information on Proposition 227 and a look at what's at stake. 1 out of every 4 California school children speaks little or no English.
Okay.
And in some schools, the numbers are even more extreme. 90% of the children at Fair Oaks Elementary are classified as limited English speakers. Fair Oaks is one of Redwood City's bilingual schools. In kindergarten, children are taught mostly in Spanish. Then, as they get older, more English is added to the curriculum.
The research that I've looked at, and there's been a lot of it, shows that kids that are thrust into English too early, it's overwhelming. Not only are they trying to learn to read in a language they don't understand, but they're trying to learn the language at the same time. And what happens is by the end of 7th, 8th grade, by the time they get into high school, they're usually 2 years behind their peers.
But not everyone is convinced bilingual education works.
What our initiative is intended to do is reorient California's education system away from bilingual education towards intensive sheltered English immersion to children who don't know English when they start school.
Teach children English by teaching them in English.
Exactly. Teach them English as quickly as possible once they start school.
Under Prop 227, children would get 1 year in sheltered English, where the teacher speaks only English and relies on visual aids, gestures, and hands-on assignments. The children would then be placed in a regular classroom. Critics call it a one-size-fits-all disaster.
Ron Unz's proposal would take all these children and put them in one classroom for 1 year, only a year, sink or swim. If you can't master English in a year, hey, you just move on to your other subjects.
Under the current system we have, children don't learn English properly. Of the quarter of the children in public schools right now in California who don't know English, only about 5 or 6% learn English each year. 95% of the children who start a school year not knowing English end that same school year still not knowing English.
We hope that lays out some of the issues for you. Now let me introduce the two journalists who will be asking the questions. First, we have Rosie Allen, KGO Radio's afternoon drive anchor and co-host of KGO TV's Marketplace. And next to her is Channel 7 news reporter Laura Marquez. Laura specializes in politics for us at Channel 7 News. Nice to have you both with us as well. Now, the rules for tonight's debate are very simple. Each side will have 45 seconds to answer the question, followed by a 45-second rebuttal. And a quick caution to all of you, please pay attention to your time cues. We want to get answers to as many questions as we possibly can, and to that end, I do not want to cut you off, but I will. With that said, the first question will go to the proponents of Prop 227, and let's begin with you, Rosie.
A popular film from last year said, "Show me the money." So let's talk about money. State of California currently spends $400 million a year for limited English-speaking programs and children. If Prop 227 becomes law, it will require the state to spend another $50 million for English classes for adults. Now, that's a total of $450 million. What happens to all of that money? Where is it going to be spent or allocated?
Okay, that's actually a very good question in terms of the money. Now, the truth is, nobody knows right now how much money is being spent in the state of California on bilingual education programs. It's certainly $400 million coming from the state level, another 50 or 60 million from the federal level, and hundreds of millions of dollars from local school districts going into these programs. It's probably over $1 billion a year. By transitioning children out of these programs much more quickly, by teaching them English quickly rather than keeping them in the program for years, they will be moved out of these programs more quickly. And as the number of students who don't know English falls, hundreds of millions of dollars a year will be saved. And we can spend that on the adult literacy programs, on textbooks, on reduced class size, on all these other things.
All right, Mr. Unz, thanks very much. Now, the No 1227 has a chance to rebut. Either of you take the question.
Certainly. The independent state legislative analyst has stated very clearly that Proposition 227 will not save taxpayers one dime. Instead, it's one of the biggest government spending programs we have ever seen. It takes all the money that's in bilingual education today, puts it into Proposition 227. On top of that, appropriates an additional $50 million a year to individuals who pledge to tutor a child in English. The money's going away from schools, away from teaching children English, and it's going to individuals who either can teach children English or not do anything with that money. In addition, it threatens $2.5 billion in federal funding that could be lost due to federal civil rights laws.
All right, Ms. Lear, thanks very much. Laura Marquez, you have the next question to the No folks on 227.
Yes, a study done by a South Bay school district found that it takes 5 years for those individuals who can't speak English to learn to read and write it effectively. Under Proposition 227, it would be a 1-year intensive immersion program. What do you think would happen to those students who cannot speak English after the 180 days of instruction?
Well, we know right now what is going to happen. We have 3 very clear pieces of information as to what happens. In Gloria Tuchman's classroom, who's the co-author of this bill and the inspiration for this program, last year, after 1 year in her sheltered English immersion program, none of her children met the criteria for being able to work in an all-English program. Now, she's a first-grade teacher. Her children had 2 years, and not one was ready. Alice Callahan's children from the 9th Street School, after 1 year in the English-only program, 74, only 2 were ready. So we know they're not going to be ready for a mainstream program. It's been tested, and it's a failed program.
All right, thank you. Mr. Vega, would you like rebuttal?
Yes. You know, the bilingual education, all statistics, all studies have been done, and the latest ones recently say that bilingual education has failed, and it has failed pathetically. We have a transition rate of only 5%. According to the LA Times, the Los Angeles Times, they did a study, and they concluded that some of the classes in California, in schools in California, some of those classes have not transitioned one student in 2 years. Now, if that isn't a failure, I don't know what is. Right now, the studies that have been made and the statistics show that in California, the Latinos, which are the ones that are in the...
Mr. Vega, you're out of time. You want to wrap it up? I'll give you a couple of seconds.
They have the lowest statistics rate, the lowest high school dropout rate, and most of those come from bilingual education programs.
All right, thank you, sir. Rose Allen, you have the next question.
Well,
for the yes on
let me follow up here, because if you, and we are to believe the numbers, the Spanish-speaking immigrant children do have the lowest test scores and the highest dropout rate. But what makes you believe that that's the fault of bilingual education?
Well, sadly as it may sound, the schools throughout California are in a real pathetic state. What are they? 2 years ago, 3 years ago, they were at the reading were at the lowest next to Guam and Louisiana. So yes, bilingual education is it's worse. Now we have to start somewhere. And bilingual education is a good start because bilingual education, by all measured by all statistics, has failed.
All right, Mr. Vega, thank you very much. Rebuttal?
Yes. You know, what we know is, and Delane Easton just announced, that the dropout rate has substantially been lowered for every category of students. But what's important to know is, out of all the 1.4 million children who need to develop English proficiency, only 30% of them ever see the inside of a bilingual classroom. 70% of all the kids in this state are in English-only programs. Now, back to Alice Callahan's kids. Her kids had a 2.7 redesignation rate. Gloria Tuchman's kids had a 0% redesignation rate. Jaime Escalante, the honorary chairperson of this, said it takes kids 2, if not 3 years to develop English proficiency. 180 days is a failed program. It will not help the kids. It'll make matters worse.
All right. All right, Laura, next question is yours.
This goes to the opponents of Proposition 227. California is a very large state. Do you think Proposition 227, which would implement the same program in school districts that would stretch from Eureka to San Diego, will work?
Actually, we have very hard evidence showing that Proposition 227 will not work. It will take California's limited English-speaking children, give them just 180 days to learn English, which no one except Ron Unz thinks can work. It will also deny them education in core curriculum. No math, no science, no history for an entire year, keeping these children 1 year behind every other child. It allows teachers to be sued if they speak in any language other than English. And also, the point that you brought up is that it will deny teachers and parents and local school districts to implement the best programs for that particular district. We have such variety here in the state of California in terms of educational needs. And that's why the State Board of Education voted on March 13th.
Ms. Thayer, you're out of time.
Thank you.
Okay, to respond to that, we have had mandatory bilingual education for virtually every school district in the state of California for the last 25 years. The system has failed. The opposition is making up statistics that have no truth to them. Right now, 1/3 of the students in California are in full-fledged native language programs, and another 1/3 are in English programs with extensive use of the native language. Approximately 60 to 70% of all limited English Latino students in the state of California in elementary school are in native language programs that use a lot of Spanish. Those are the children failing in our public schools. Let's look at the facts. Of all the immigrant groups in California, the one immigrant group that is given large quantities of native language bilingual instruction are Latino immigrant children, and they do worse than every other immigrant group in the state. It's because of bilingual education that they're failing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Unz. Rosie, you have the next question.
Yes, under Prop 227, parents who want their children taught using the bilingual education system have that option. They can apply for a waiver if the classes aren't offered at their child's school. They can also transfer to another school that has that program. So that bilingual education is still available under 227. So do you object to that plan?
I guess I'll...
For the noes?
It's for the... Is it for the no?
For the no.
For the no.
For the no.
Please take that question.
You know, it would be nice if that were true, except if you read very clearly in the initiative, for children under the age of 10, that is not an option until 30 days after school has begun. And then a parent has to prove to the school, to the teachers and the principal, that their child is suffering academically, emotionally, psychologically, or physically. That's the only way they get out. So I'm a parent. I bring my child to school. I have a particular preference for my child. The answer is no, and there is no choice. Then even if I were to go through that rigmarole, I have to find 19 others at my grade level who have the same beliefs and the same desire before I get what I might want for my child. And at the end of the day, the school gets to deny it, whether I meet the standards and go through the process.
Right.
And so this waiver system is not tenable.
All right, rebuttal, please.
It is absolutely true that this initiative allows those parents that want to place or keep their children in a bilingual program to apply for a waiver to do so. Now, we have a secret weapon with regard to this initiative. It's called the voter pamphlet. Any ordinary voter gets it in the mail. You can read what the initiative says. You can read our arguments and the other side's arguments and see who's being true and who's distorting the facts. Those parents that want their children in native language programs can apply for a waiver. For older children who are 10 and above, it's quite easy. For younger children, the parents simply have to show that their children would benefit in some ways from not being taught English in the public schools. I think bilingual education is a dreadful failure in the state of California today, but California is a very large state. And in a state this large, there are a few bilingual programs that work well. Those would remain under our initiative.
All right, Mr. Rons, thank you. Laura, if you direct your next question to the yes on 227 side.
Mr. Vega, this question is for you, actually. You set up bilingual education programs in the 70s. Now you say that's a mistake. Some polls show that 84% of Latinos favor Proposition 227. Why do you think it is that those who bilingual education is supposed to help want the program now dismantled?
Well, the initial concept was very much like the dual immersion program that they have now. It would be 50% English-speaking students and 50% Spanish-speaking students. It wasn't long before that, before the English-speaking parents found out that their children were falling behind. And as such, the Latinos were remaining in the program. But as they stayed in the program, the districts found out that the program was good for bringing in revenues, and now the whole bilingual program is driven by money. The more students that the district holds back, the more money the district makes. So there's an incentive there not to transition students, because for every children that they transition, the district loses money.
All right, Mr. Vega, thank you very much. Rebuttal, please.
Yes. I'm glad you asked about the polling, because what the polls show is that Proposition 227 is losing in the Latino community. The poll you're referring to, the field poll, they went out, they talked to 86 Latinos. That's hardly a mandate. Now, the polling actually shows, with the larger sample size, shows that Proposition 227 is losing in the Latino community. The split is 45 to 46. In addition, Ron, I have heard you now for months bash the Latino community. Latinos are not, they do not have the highest dropout rate. Delane Easton just came out with some figures that show that their dropout rate is significantly lower than the statewide average. In addition, there was a national study done by Rombant who said that immigrant children are actually outperforming native children, people that were born here in the United States.
All right. You're out of time. Forgive me for interrupting. Earlier in the week, as you may know if you watch Channel 7 News, we asked members of our viewing audience to fax or email questions that they had regarding Prop 227. So here's one that both sides will have a chance to answer, and we're going to start with the yes on 227 side. And I don't know who this is from, unfortunately, but it was faxed to us. For children who emigrate in their teenage years, their education has already been interrupted. How do you keep them in school? How do you propose to educate them without alienating them?
I'd like to answer that.
Please, Mr. Vega.
You know, if a teenager comes here, that's 12, 14, and 16 years old, they already know their language. They know Spanish, or they know Russian. You know, it's ludicrous to assign a student that's already know the language and say, pues, now we're going to have to teach you Spanish. That student's already had 6 or 8 years, and we're going to waste 4 more years, 6 more years teaching them Spanish. Those students need English, and they need it bad and fast, and we're not getting that.
All right, Mr. Vega, thank you. Rebuttal, please.
Yes, you know what, the question for older students is a very important question, especially for high school students. If you take the high school students who come here and you give them this program for a whole year, and you don't give them the courses they need for grade level promotion and graduation, essentially what this Proposition 227 does is make high school a 5-year program for children who don't speak English, because they will not get the course credits they need to graduate. That will crowd our schools, that will add to the school budget, and that will deny children access to the courses that they deserve at their grade level. It's another example of how this proposition is a simple response to a very complex issue that school districts need the individual control to design what's best for their kids. We're saying here that we have good programs, we have programs that need improvement. This will make it worse.
All right, bad news is you're out of time. The good news is it's your turn. Another question came in from Craig from Los Gatos. Craig asked, considering that no other industrialized nation teaches its immigrants using bilingualism, these same nations continually outperform us on international academic tests. Is bilingual education handicapping California students?
Well, you know, it's not true that no other industrial nation teaches bilingual education. We have examples from all over the world. In Mexico, with the various languages that some of the indigenous populations speak, they have a variety of bilingual programs in Spanish and in the indigenous languages. In Germany, for the Turkish immigrants who come there, we have Turkish-German bilingual programs. In Sweden, for the Finnish immigrants that immigrate there, we have Finnish-Swedish programs. So we are not the only place that has it. But what we don't have in any other place around the world is a 180-day magical program that makes kids fluent in English in 180 days. This would be the only place. Mr. Unz and Mr. Vega cannot point to one classroom, one school where this has a proven track record, and we're going to mandate it for every child. It's a travesty.
Let's give them the chance.
Okay, the answer to that is that the person who called in the question was 100% right. There is no other major nation in the world with a large immigrant population that uses these bilingual programs. They all teach children the national language immediately in exactly the sort of short-term intensive language programs that our initiative talks about. In fact, most of the programs in these other nations are 1 year, just like our initiative proposes. We're not talking about one country. We're talking about Germany and France and Britain and Australia and Canada and in Israel. In Israel, children enter the public schools speaking 60 different languages. They are not taught in their family's language. They are all taught Hebrew right away, and it works well. America is unique in trying this failed system of bilingual education. Nobody else tries it because it doesn't work, and it doesn't work, as you can see from the data here in California.
All right, thank you, sir. Laura, you have the next question.
And this is for the supporters of Proposition 227. Now, Proposition 227 allows parents to sue teachers, in the words of the proposition, who willfully and repeatedly refuse to obey the law and teach children in English. Does this set up school districts and teachers for time-consuming, costly lawsuits?
Absolutely not. But the reason that provision is necessary is because this initiative began when I read articles in Los Angeles Times about a group of immigrant Latino parents in downtown Los Angeles who actually had to start a public boycott of their local elementary school because it refused to allow their children to learn English. Now, under current law in California, bilingual education is voluntary. It is not mandatory in law, but it is mandatory in practice. What we do is give parents the right to enforce our initiative by requiring the schools to teach their children English. And I think those teachers or those administrators or those elected officials who refuse to obey the law, repeatedly and willfully refuse to obey the law, should be under threat of legal sanction, and they will be.
Rebuttal, please.
Actually, we think that teachers should spend more time in the classroom rather than the courtroom. And what Proposition 227 will do for the first time ever is allow teachers, allow school districts, allow principals to be sued just for trying to do their job, just for trying to teach children English. Proposition 227 will also take and impose across the state of California a single law that dictates how children will be taught English, whether that program works for them or not. It will limit children to just 180 days of English instruction and allow teachers to be sued just for speaking in any language other than English.
All right, thank you. Rosie, you have the next question.
If Proposition 227 passes, what do you think the likelihood is that it will become law, given the fact that a lot of the most controversial propositions that have been passed in California are now still in the courts?
Rosie, I'm glad that you asked that question. And right now, all of our time is going to defeating this initiative. And we could see even from Ron Unn's own polls, he was just quoted in the San Jose Mercury News as saying that his own polling shows that he only has 54 percentage point support for this measure. So we are going to be spending every second of the next 2 days, 3 days, getting people out, urging them to please vote on June 2nd and to vote no on Proposition 227.
All right, thank you, rebuttal.
To be honest, the other side is making up ridiculous facts about the initiative. Let's look at the details. The Clinton administration has already reviewed our initiative and already said to the Chronicle that it was absolutely constitutional. The Ninth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals in Guadalupe versus Tempe already ruled that there is no federal requirement for bilingual education. Initiatives are always challenged in court once they pass, but the chance of any significant challenge to our initiative is nil. If the voters vote for our initiative, it will become the law, and all children in California will have the right, after all these years, to be taught English as soon as they begin school, and that's necessary for our state. We need a common language to be taught to children in California public schools, and that will happen if people vote for our initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Unz. We are very quickly running out of time, so let's move on now to the closing statements from each side. Each side has 60 seconds to respond. Now, based on a coin flip that was held before the debate, the people against Prop 227 will speak first. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. On June 2nd, you will have the opportunity to determine the future of California's 1.4 million limited English-speaking children. And what we're asking you is to give these kids a chance. Don't limit them to just 180 days of English instruction when everywhere this program has been tried, it shows that children need more time. Don't deny them education in core curriculum. Don't keep them 1 year behind in math, science, and history, and 1 grade behind every other child simply because they showed up at the schoolhouse door and didn't know English. Don't put them in a classroom with teachers who can be sued if they just try and do their job and teach them English. And don't make taxpayers spend more money. Don't pass the biggest government spending program that we've seen in years. Don't allocate an additional $50 million a year every year to individuals who pledge to tutor a child for English but don't even have to ever do that. Join the California League of Women Voters, the PTA, the CTA, and every candidate for Governor and Mayor Willie Brown in voting no on Proposition 227.
Ms. Thayer, thank you. You're out of time. Mr.
Okay.
Unz, a closing statement, please.
Look at the facts. The opposition campaign is so desperate. They're making up the most ridiculous lies and distortions of our initiative. Read the initiative, read the voter pamphlet. You'll see who's telling the truth. Right now, we have a system of tremendous failure in California. 95% of the children each year who start a given school year not knowing English have not learned it at the end of that school year. Those are the official government statistics from the Office of Bilingual Instruction. Instead, let's teach children English. What we call bilingual education in California often amounts to Spanish-only instruction, with the children being given 30 minutes or an hour of English a day. It doesn't help them learn English. These children need to learn English to succeed in our society, and unless you vote for our initiative, nothing will change in the current system. It's your one chance to make sure that children in California are given the educational tools they need to succeed in our society, and knowledge of English is one of them. Our initiative does allow successful bilingual programs to continue, but almost none of them are successful.
All right, Mr. Unz, we are out of time with that. Thank you very much. We'd like to thank the spokespeople from both sides of Proposition 227 for joining us tonight, as well as our two journalists. It was a pleasure and informative. And we'd like to remind you that our guests will be continuing this debate on KGO Radio 810 starting in just a couple of minutes at 7 o'clock, continuing until 8 o'clock tonight, so be sure to tune in. We certainly hope that you found this discussion informative. We hope you'll vote on Tuesday and join us for our election coverage. I'm Dan Ashley. Thanks for joining us, and good night.